while learning how to protect themselves.
Thank you guys for joining our Krav Maga class. I'm Oren Malul, and remember, a single move can save your life.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. We are live from Israel with the biggest headlines from Israel and the region. It's currently 7 a.m. in New York and 2 p.m. here in Israel. I'm Devo Klein, and here is your roundup of all of the latest developments coming out of Israel. A new report by Kan News claims that last night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told ministers in his cabinet that Washington has given Jerusalem the green light to renew an offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The report does not cite any sources, but does say that both Israel and Washington are dissatisfied with the Lebanese government's efforts to curb Hezbollah's power. This report comes amid continued Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon on the terror group's positions, with the latest airstrike targeting a member of Hezbollah's aerial unit. He was tasked with re-establishing Hezbollah's aerial arsenal. Now, with Hezbollah's continuous attempts to rebuild and rearm on Israel's border, in violation, of course, of the 2024 ceasefire agreement, paired with the Lebanese failure to control the terror group, speculation grows that an Israeli assault on Hezbollah is imminent and could occur any day. And on the Gaza front, clashes were reported between Hamas and IDF troops stationed near the Yellow Line. Following the clashes, the IDF struck a home in Gaza City's Tufah neighborhood, killing 2 people. Although the dead have not yet been identified, the IDF is saying that the targets were senior terrorists. And this morning, a failed projectile was seen being launched from Gaza City toward the state of Israel. The projectile fell in an open area and did not cause any injuries to Israelis or soldiers. Now, shortly after, the IDF precisely struck the launch point from which the projectile exited. Meanwhile, the United States is still pushing for Phase 2 of the Gaza deal. A worrying report from Axios claims that Washington plans to begin Phase 2 of the agreement before Hamas is disarmed and before the body of the final Israeli hostage is returned. The Red Cross and Hamas have yesterday renewed search and rescue efforts to locate the body of Master Sergeant Ran Gvili, with today marking day 825 of his captivity. There is daylight between Washington and Jerusalem, as reports indicate that the Trump administration has made clear to Netanyahu that it still remains committed to both goals, disarming Hamas and bringing home the remains of Gvili, but at the same time is not prepared to condition the start of Phase 2 on either. And joining me now to discuss all of these developments are 2 panelists, experts in this field, Professor Gerald Steinberg of NGO Monitor and Ori Saschal, Director of Research at IDSF. Thank you both for coming on the show today.
Good to be with you.
So we have quite a few developments coming out of Lebanon, which is actually where I want to start. Now, in November 2024, the U.S. brokered an agreement between Israel and Lebanon following just around a year of war and hostilities. An agreement sounds fine and dandy, but Hezbollah has never had any intention to stop targeting Israel, and their agreement, the violations and reestablishing efforts further prove this point. The Lebanese army are simply not able to disarm the terror group, so it's time Israel step in and take the reins. And as I reported, Washington is basically giving Jerusalem the okay to do so. So what would a resumption look like on the northern border? Are we back to a situation where Israeli reservists have to stop their lives and northern residents have to suffer more rockets? Or is this time around going to be a little bit different, a different kind of offensive? Ori Saschal, I'd like to start with you and get your opinion on this.
Right. So the ceasefire agreement was designed to pave the path to Hezbollah's demise, basically to disarm Hezbollah and allow Lebanon to be a normal state as a neighbor of Israel. And I have to say, this is we can't just skip the fact that a ceasefire agreement was concluded following the Israeli military success. Israel paid with blood and treasure in order to pave the path for Hezbollah to be disarmed. And so the Lebanese government's role right now is to make good on that promise. The government there decided back in August that it will disarm Hezbollah. Obviously, we know that Lebanon has no real means to do it without external assistance, but we can't ignore the fact that it is thanks to Israeli military action, blood and treasure, that the Lebanese government was able to state its intention in the first place of fear of being targeted by Hezbollah, terror group that effectively runs Lebanon. And so right now, Hezbollah is badly struck, but the mission has to be completed. And Israel remains committed. We can see how Israel strikes Hezbollah targets, as you just reported, be it senior officials, militants, or the armament itself. And had Israel not struck Hezbollah, it would violate the ceasefire agreement. I'm reminding you, the ceasefire agreement says that Israel has to prevent Hezbollah from rearming, not necessarily react to direct assaults by Hezbollah in Israel. And so this really summons the commitment of the Lebanese people and the Lebanese government. Yes, they will have assistance from Israel and from the United States, and Israel has proven its track record of helping Lebanon to do so. But the Lebanese government has to be committed to do so.
Yeah, Gerald, I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well. And if you could also continue on Ol's point, and I'm curious, why is it so hard for the Lebanese government to control Hezbollah? Why is Hezbollah so deeply entrenched, not just militarily, but also politically in southern Lebanon?
Hezbollah is a force that basically is an Iranian proxy arm. And they're designed primarily to attack Israel so that Israel will not attack Iran. It's sort of maybe a deterrent, so Israel will not attack Iran, because that was at least the plan up until a year ago. That Hezbollah, with its huge arsenal of rockets and its ability to invade northern Israel, would be able to prevent Israel from attacking Iran, and therefore that was a very important part of the Iranian strategy while they developed nuclear weapons and why they increased their ballistic missile capability. Well, Hezbollah has really absolutely been weakened. They no longer act as a deterrent. We saw that because in June, 7 months after the ceasefire, Israel did attack Iran and did tremendous damage. Hezbollah naturally wants to rebuild that capability. The Lebanese government basically is a shell. It has, certainly in terms of military and security. I don't know if President Trump, way back in last November, said, well, we're going to have greatest peace. We're going to disarm Hezbollah. It's all going to be great. I'm going to get the Nobel Peace Prize. But if he believed that, then certainly reality has caught up. But I doubt he really thought that. The rhetoric was important. It was an attempt to get the Lebanese government and Hezbollah itself and Iran to lower its profile, not to try to rebuild. That has not been overly successful. And so therefore, all the things that Or talked about are now on the table. I think the type of military action Israel might take, and I want to say might take, because right now we're still at the rhetorical stage. Right now, all these are rumors. They're planted rumors. They're manipulated rumors. They're leaks. This is all part of the game. That's the game of diplomacy, the game of deterrence that's being played. Maybe the message will get across, not just to Lebanon as a government, but also to Iran that controls Hezbollah and Hezbollah's leaders. They don't want to get another hit like they got a series of hits that began with the beepers and everything else. They don't know what other things Israel can do to weaken them, destroy them. They want to maintain as much as they can of their civilian infrastructure and be part of the Shiite force that's in Lebanon. That's about the most they're going to get. If they risk that, they'll have nothing left. So I think that this is still at the stage of rhetoric. Look, the Israeli military, the reserve soldiers, and even the soldiers in the standing army right now are exhausted. They fought since October 7th. They fought very valiantly, bravely. There are many soldiers still in reserve or back in reserve duty in Gaza, preparing for other attacks elsewhere. To go to a major military ground-based operation in southern Lebanon would be quite difficult for the Israeli military as well. It's not something they want to do. So therefore, sending out these warnings and hoping that the message will get through is a last chance is part of the whole process. If it does take place, I think it'll be primarily an air-based attack, going after the points that the strongholds where they're storing weapons, where they have training facilities, where they have communications capabilities, and the individuals that have been brought in to run those operations after the commanders were killed in the previous year. All those things will be targets, but I think primarily it'll be an air operation with some ground operation in the south to whatever is left, or whatever tunnels, whatever rockets, whatever other facilities are there, to make sure that those cannot be rebuilt.
Mm-hmm. And, I think it's interesting that actually both of you mentioned how, weakened Hezbollah has been. But the truth is that the Islamic regime in Iran is incredibly weak right now with all of the unrest going on in Iran. And, the Islamic regime are the suppliers and funders of Hezbollah, Hamas, all the proxies in the region. So should the unrest in Iran continue with all of these protests, and there's already speculation that of what might happen to the regime, could this affect Hezbollah's capabilities significantly enough for Israel to then come in and finish the job? Or I'd like you to take that one.
Yeah, as Gerald said, Hezbollah is an Iranian arm, and so there are reports in the U.S. that Iran, even since the strike on Iran back in June, the 12-day war, Iran has funneled over $1 billion to Hezbollah. I don't know the credibility of these reports, but they certainly do wire significant amount of funds and armament throughout the years. Hezbollah, I'm also reminding you, everything affects in the end the end result, let's say, of these efforts, which is Hezbollah, because the backstory of Hezbollah is a whole vast area of narco-terrorism. Capturing Maduro will also affect it heavily. The funds of the kind of revenue that Hezbollah has from narco-terrorism. The strike in Iran back in June weakened and exposed the Iranian regime. That also affected. And now, to your point, if protests continue and that would affect the stability of the regime, we can safely assume that it will also affect the standing of Hezbollah. So all of that should be taken into account, and all of these are pieces of the puzzle. But in order to know more, we'll have to see where the next few days and weeks lead us.
And, Professor Steinberg, what's your anticipation and your assessment when it comes to the regime and their connection to Hezbollah and everything that they're dealing with in Iran right now?
We've been over the last, since 1979, when the Islamic Revolution took place, and the Ayatollah Khomeini basically took over Iran. It was a coup, it was a revolution. And since then, we've had periods of time where there were mass demonstrations against the regime, protests. That's something very interesting about Iran, is people do go out to the streets. This is the most extensive and in many ways the most courageous effort to get rid of the regime in Iran. And first of all, we have to give them a tremendous amount of respect to the leaders of this who are going out there and really risking their lives to do this. It's hard to look from the outside and get a sense of how serious this is, but certainly the images that you're showing here, and very massive crowds in some places very far away from Tehran, even, that you see that the capabilities that exist for the regime are very much being taxed, and they may not be able to survive this process. So I think that right now we have to sit and we have to watch. It'll be very interesting also, and that's an understatement. President Trump said that if they kill the demonstrators, that the United States will intervene. I think he used stronger language than that. If that's another serious threat, and you got to take after not only the American involvement in the war in June, but also the events in Venezuela and Maduro and everything else that's going on, I think the threats that Trump makes have to be taken seriously as deterrent. So yes, the regime is very much on the brink, and it would be a tremendous change, certainly for Israelis, for Jews around the world, and for the region, and for the Iranians, most importantly, the Iranian people, if this regime is overthrown. I don't think we can get ahead of ourselves and see that as something imminent, but it could happen any day. There's no way of predicting this, just as there was no way of predicting when the Soviet leadership, the Soviet Empire, was overthrown in 1990. And there are a lot of similarities between what's gone on and the weakening of Iran, the very systematic weakening of Iran, militarily last June by Israel and by the United States, economically much stronger now. And then also what's gone on now, the Americans have captured 2 oil tankers, part of the dark fleet. That's also going to have a direct impact on Iran's ability to export oil, also on Russia. The world is changing in many, many different ways. And the end of the Iranian regime, even the weakening of the Iranian regime, which I think has already happened, not just militarily, but we see now internally, it will take them a long time if they survive to recover. I think those are also major changes. So we live in interesting times, as the Chinese curse says, but in this case, I think ones that could very well lead to a much more positive environment for Israel.
Absolutely. It's too soon to tell, but I don't think it's too crazy to hope. But gentlemen, I'd like to move from one front to the other. I'd like to move on to Gaza and address the report that I gave earlier, because from our perspective here in Israel, at this moment, it seems absolutely inconceivable to move on to phase 2 of rebuilding Gaza when Ran Gvili's body is still in the hands of Hamas. And, that very terror group we vowed to disarm have not only not disarmed, but have also already regained power, both military and political power in the Gaza Strip. So this report is making headlines at this time, but I'd like to get your opinions on this report, because to me, it seems absolutely insane to move on to phase 2 when Hamas is still very much in power. Or if you can start us off.
Yes, so I've been in touch with the family of Ran Gvili, and I hosted his aunt over in our podcast, Security Talk. They are concerned, to your point, that the Ran Gvili story will be put to rest, that he will be yet another Hadar Goldin, God forbid, and will be sort of remain in the Gaza Strip. My expectation is that Israel does not move on to the next phase before Ran Gvili is back home. And this is the last hostage. He is presumably deceased, but Israel has already received back 254 hostages, and we have a safe reason to assume that Hamas knows his whereabouts. They know the whereabouts of Hadar Goldin after 11 years in a tunnel exposed by a crater of a bomb. So I'm sure that they would know such a thing, especially that they knew the location of the other mortar remains of the hostages. And Israel has every right, and I think the United States has every right to insist on his return before moving on to phase B. Reminding you, this is the ceasefire agreement's terms. Hamas brings back all of the hostages, all of them, and in return, Israel releases a certain amount of terrorists from its prisons. Hamas has not kept its side of the bargain repeatedly, and we're just looking at phase B. I think we can be optimistic when it comes to this administration, because both President Trump, Secretary Rubio, all the relevant people keep saying that they are committed to disarm Hamas and demilitarize Gaza. And that is not too much to ask after suffering the worst genocide and a massacre on the Jewish people in the past 80 years since the Holocaust. It's not too much to ask to disarm the party that instigated it. And that's a primary American interest as well, to disarm Hamas. This whole October 7 attack triggered an entire regional warfare in Iran, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen. So we have every right to uproot this evil in the Gaza Strip. After over 2 years, the Israeli public would expect Hamas in Gaza to vanish from the face of the earth. And the point is not to get to the very last militant, but rather disarm the structure and put in place a new kind of entity that would, or multiple entities that would move Gaza to the next phase.
Right, but when it comes to the disarmament, we haven't really gotten any real answers on the disarmament. Israel is kind of out of options here when it comes to who will actually go in and disarm Hamas. We're clearly not letting Turkish forces in. And it seems every day that goes by, it seems more and more likely that it's going to have to be us. It's going to have to be Israel and the IDF who goes in to disarm Hamas. Professor Steinberg, what do you make of this?
I make a lot of confusion, because again, the rhetoric that we heard when the ceasefire was announced was really very unrealistic. Most of us in Israel realized that. Not sure again what Trump or Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner thought in Washington about this, but the rhetoric very much outstripped the reality, and we see it now. There are no countries that have agreed, and no countries will agree to commit forces if they're going to be targeted. If they actually try to disarm Hamas, they'll be targeted, they'll leave right away. That's not going to happen. There's a European force that's been sitting around since the Gaza disengagement of 2005, European Union force, UBAM, which has been sitting in a hotel, I think, in Ashkelon for that entire time. So we're talking about almost 20 years. They ran away the first time Hamas showed up at the Rafiq, or the Rafah crossing. So everybody that remembers that history, and some of us old enough to remember that, know that having foreign forces, whether the European, the Turks, the Americans are closer, friendlier to the Turks. Trump calls Erdogan his friend. Netanyahu says, we're not going to let any Turks in. We'll see how that gets resolved. But I think it's much more complicated than which forces are going to do it. In Kiryat Gat, there's something called the Civil Military Coordinating Center, CMCC, where you have American military, Israeli military, American diplomats, Israeli diplomats, and you have Europeans, and we have a whole bunch of NGOs talking about who's going to rebuild Gaza and what kind of humanitarian aid facilities are going to be allowed in. And Israel said all these NGOs that have been cooperating with Hamas, that allow terrorists into their ranks, that worked in Gaza for years and knew that there were tunnels underneath and knew that they were preparing whatever attacks, and they had all these missiles, and cooperated with them. Groups like Oxfam and Doctors Without Borders, Norwegian Refugee Council, Save the Children. The Israeli government said, we have a new system. And by the way, this system has been discussed for 10 years. It finally is being implemented. They got told, they had originally 9 months ago to submit their applications. And then the Israeli government said, okay, we'll give you another 9 months, deadline of December 31st. These organizations refused to cooperate. Therefore, because they were cooperating with Hamas but will not fill out the forms and identify who their staffers are so they can be checked for terrorist connections, they're not going to be allowed to operate in Gaza or any place else under Israeli control. There's a huge political fight going on. The heads of the European Union have issued declarations, and the NGO industry is huge. They're multi-billion dollars, just to give you an idea. Doctors Without Borders, which is one of the worst in terms of cooperating with Hamas and doing genocide propaganda and other lies. They have a budget of $2.2 billion, including money from governments like Canada and Switzerland and all sorts of other sources. Well, they have tremendous power to exert pressure on Israel and also on Washington. And so far, the Americans and the Israeli government have said absolutely not. If these organizations want to work with us, then they have to cooperate according to the regulations, which are absolutely consistent with any government that wants to filter and check and do due diligence and oversight regarding terrorist infiltration of humanitarian aid groups. That's a very known and very serious problem, not only in Israel, but also in Sudan, in Central Africa, and other places where there are terrorist regimes that are involved, just as Hamas is, in mass killing and control all the aid that goes in. That's a fundamental point that has yet to be resolved. And I think we're going to see a lot of skirmishing around that. And then comes the question of who's going to actually do the disarmament, if anybody. I think that you're absolutely right that it's very likely that only Israel will be able to do disarmament. There'll be pressure. Again, Trump wants to push the image of being a peacemaker, even though he knows it's all nonsense. But he wants to push the image. So there may be some pressure on Israel. I don't trust when you get journalists writing about anonymous sources and say that this is going to happen next week, phase 2. Let's wait and see if that actually happens. But yes, I can see that there are voices in Washington who want to do that, want to go to that phase and say, well, okay, we don't have a solution for disarmament, but let's do it anyway. Let's start rebuilding. And that's something Israel's going to have to cope with, the political pressure as well, but within the context of maintaining our fundamental red lines. No terrorists, not through humanitarian aid organizations, not through the UN, not through UNRWA, not through other UN groups, and certainly also not allowing those that are already in Gaza to continue to operate. That's a major set of issues that have yet to be resolved.
Absolutely. A lot of questions, and unfortunately at this point, not enough answers. But gentlemen, with that, we do have to wrap up. I want to thank you both so much for coming on the show today, Professor Gerald Steinberg and Ori Yisachar. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
And on the 12th day of anti-regime protests in Iran, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has issued his most direct message yet to the people of Iran. Pahlavi urged Iranians to continue protesting against the regime and encouraged unity, saying that strength lies in the masses. In another message, Pahlavi addressed the regime forces themselves. Have a listen.
همین در این چند روز گذشته من از نزدیک تظاهرات و راهپیمایی شما را دنبال کردم، به خصوص امروز در بازار تهران. علیرغم سرکوب نظام، ایستادگی شما ستودنی است و قطعا توجه کردید که ازدحام جمعیت باعث این میشه که نیروها پس بروند و امکان ریزش رو به سمت شما بیشتر میکنند. بنابراین مهم استش که این انضباط و گستردگی رو حفظ بکنیم. من اولین فراخوان خود را امروز با شما در میان میگذارم و از شما دعوت میکنم که این جمعه و پنجشنبه 18 و 19 دی ماه را سر ساعت 8 شب همگی چه در خیابان‌ها یا حتی از منازل خودتون شروع به شعار سر دادن بکنید. در نتیجه بازخورد این حرکت‌ها من فراخوان‌های بعدی رو به شما اعلام خواهم کرد.
And good news for Israeli travelers, as Arkia Airlines have launched the first ever direct flight from Tel Aviv to Hanoi, Vietnam, in a major development for Israelis who we know absolutely love Southeast Asia. Travelers can now enjoy reasonable prices and not be stuck with the only option of El Al. But that's not all. Budget airline Wizz Air are expanding their flights to Tel Aviv with brand new locations now on the map, like the Balkans, the UAE, Morocco, and others. In addition to this, Delta Airlines is restoring direct flights from Atlanta and Boston to Israel, and ITA Airways is resuming 2 daily flights from Rome to Tel Aviv, reestablishing a key European gate. Now, what does all this news mean? Well, more options means increased competition. More competition means lower airfares, something we are all excited for. But instead of me breaking this down, we have with us today Mark Feldman, the CEO of Zion Tours Jerusalem. Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
So, Mark, we have a lot of airlines finally opening up to Tel Aviv and really seizing the potential of this market, which is in dire need of cheap options for flights. It's going to take some time. It won't be immediate, but this is bad news for El Al. Can we expect El Al to lower their prices because of this competition, or will they actually be doubling down? What do you think?
We have to keep everything in proportion. The rhetoric that's going around in the world rankles. It scares people. The Trump doctrine, okay, where you can pick up a despot, take him out, take 2 tankers, scares people. It scares potential tourism. When the Prime Minister of Israel talks about that we may be going back into Lebanon, it scares my Christian tourists who want to come here for Easter. So the fact that the Israeli consumer theoretically is going to enjoy Wizz Air opening up a base here in a few months and 50, 60 flights a day to Europe at unbelievably low prices, it's still a bit of a pipe dream. In other words, we've gone through COVID. We went through the corona pandemic. We went through 2 years of war. Yes, many, many airlines are coming back. Air Canada itself is coming back with Toronto and Montreal and pointed out at a press conference that unfortunately 80% of every plane is filled with Israelis. So from the point of view of the Israeli consumer, yes, they will find lower prices. Yes, going to Vietnam on a nonstop plane, actually less for all competition against Etihad and Emirates, which has taken the bulk of people to the Far East and even to down Asia via Dubai and Abu Dhabi. This is how it's happening. The question is, will this turn into reality? We all know, unfortunately, in the tourism industry, it can change in an instant, okay? The tourism industry needs stability. It needs things to be calm. And unfortunately, we don't live in a calm world. We read the headlines, we watch the headlines, we listen to experts on ILTV. It's a scary situation. So how do I plan something? Do I go to China, where they've said, we're now going to go into Taipei and go after Taiwan because we saw the Trump doctrine as possible? Do I go to Greece, where there's anti-demonstrations against in a government that loves Israel, that works with us in Cyprus? So in theory, it sounds wonderful. Short-term prices will drop. The question is, will you and I speak in 2 or 3 months and realize it all went up in smoke because of attacks or wars or hostilities renewing? We're going back 6, 7 years pre the corona pandemic to airlines flying here, to having competition, to lower prices. And it's a panacea. It's wonderful. The question, though, in the back and in the front of many potential tourists' minds, will it last? Arkia, for example, in addition to its Hanoi, announced a massive code-sharing thing with JetBlue, the 6th largest American airline, going after much more effectively El Al's marketplace, almost near monopoly to the United States. We have United and Delta, we have American Airlines coming back. But Arkia, the second Israeli airline, wants to fly to America in partnership with JetBlue. Well, Arkia has a major, major problem. Their customer relations suck. It's probably the worst airline that if you ever have to deal with it. We have dozens of complaints from consumers, Israeli consumers, wanting to make changes. So how does an airline like Arkia that sees the future, that wants to increase tourism, it's a whole package. It's not just a press release announcing flights to Vietnam or announcing a code share agreement with JetBlue in North America. It's following through. It's 2026. It's no longer the flying experience. Consumers demand customer relations. They demand it from A to Z. When I get to the airport, when I get on the plane, if something happens. Not every airline can provide that. And Arkia today, sadly, isn't one of those.
So your assessment really is that despite all of this, despite all of these developments, El Al will still remain the dominant airline because the prices are just they're astronomically high, and a lot of Israelis can't even afford these prices, and they're going to search for flights, and they're seeing the numbers and going, well, I guess I can't leave the country. So what do you think is going to happen to El Al moving forward?
Look, El Al last week announced a massive increase of flights, 7 daily flights to New York, 7, okay? They're anticipating filling those planes with people who want the security of flying El Al. Delta and United, when they came back in American and Well, did something very surprising. They matched El Al's prices. They didn't lower them. They didn't try to entice you to switch to their airline. They kept the prices with El Al. Europe, conversely, is the opposite. ITA Airlines, the Italian airline, Air France, the French airline, British Airways, their re-entry to travel to Europe has brought lower prices today. So it's a two-edged sword. We're seeing the lower prices to destinations nearby. We're not seeing the lower prices to destinations far away, whether it be Hanoi or Bangkok or Los Angeles or Atlanta. Those prices continue to be high. That will only change when we see incoming tourism. That will only change when we see the hotel industry talking about being full. Until that happens, we, the Israeli consumer, are filling 80% of that plane. So even if there's more capacity and more competition, it's not enough to drive the price down.
And what is your hope for Israeli tourism? How can we get as many tourists? Like you say, there's the whole Christian tourism industry, especially in Jerusalem. And we just had Christmas where Christian tourism was supposed to be at an all-time high. What can you report from the numbers of this past Christmas? Were they satisfactory? Is there anything that we can do to bump up these numbers?
Look, I think those people that reported on Bethlehem or on Nazareth saw throngs of tourists there. But these were primarily Arab Christians there. These were not overseas tourists. These were not pilgrims. So the numbers were wonderful, and it was wonderful to see those cities celebrating Christmas. Markets in Haifa, in their German colony, was filled with Israelis. I'm getting replies and responses for Easter. My Christians are tepidly stepping into the water. They're asking, what about it? The hotels have space, okay, for both Easter and still for Passover this year. The question is, will it last? Tourism does not live in a bubble. So my dream is that we do have peace. My dream is that this status quo that exists in Lebanon and in Gaza continues. Would it be nice if the saber rattling was lowered down? Would it be nice if I don't turn on the news and hear, starting with reports of doing this and exiting that? This is the problem, okay? We don't live in a vacuum.
Absolutely. And, there's definitely a lot to discuss here on this front of the tourism. And we're definitely, I would say, feeling it here in Israel. We're definitely feeling the lack of tourism. Israel is usually a hotspot, especially for Christians. And we hope and we pray that tourism continues to get better. Mark, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing with us your insights and analysis. Thank you so much.
Most welcome.
And that is a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. I'm Devo Klein, and thank you so much for joining us and for watching today.
Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Ladar Gravelazi, and coming up in today's newscast. Iran's army chief threatens Israel and the United States as anti-regime protests expand throughout the country. Israel and Syria reach a diplomatic breakthrough in talks. Is normalization around the corner? After the recognition, Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar visits Somaliland. Tensions are rising between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States and Israel. Iran's military chief is now openly threatening a response to U.S. President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This as the nationwide anti-regime protests continue and the death toll rises. All the details in the following report.
Iran's military commander-in-chief is now threatening Israel and the United States, saying the regime considers the escalation of hostile rhetoric against Iran a threat which will not be tolerated without a response. The statement follows expressions of support for the nationwide protests sweeping the country by both Israeli and American leadership, as well as threats by U.S. President Donald Trump to intervene in Iran if the regime kills the demonstrators. Meanwhile, the nationwide protests are continuing and expanding. Demonstrators clash with security forces inside Tehran's Grand Bazaar, where protests have entered their 11th day. The death toll continues to rise. So far, 36 have been killed, 2,000 have been arrested, a number which has doubled over the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, Iranian authorities say they executed a man accused of spying for Israel. Ali Ardestani was convicted of espionage for Israel's Mossad and executed after approval by the Islamic Republic's Supreme Court. The execution comes amid a wider crackdown, with the regime increasingly carrying out death sentences and detentions on espionage charges, a move rights groups say is being used to intimidate the people of Iran.
And so as the number of casualties in the protests continue to rise, all eyes are on U.S. President Donald Trump, waiting to see if he will follow through and intervene in Iran. And in a rare diplomatic breakthrough, Israel and Syria have reached a new understanding in Paris aimed at reducing tensions along their long-contested border in the Golan Heights and opening the door to future cooperation, including economic talks. The agreement, brokered under U.S. mediation, stops short of peace, but officials on both sides are calling it a practical step forward after months of stalled dialogue. ILTV correspondent Alec Pollard has more details.
This week in Paris, during a third round of discreet negotiations, senior Israeli and Syrian officials agreed to a joint communication mechanism to de-escalate conflict, share intelligence, and explore economic opportunities. Israeli leaders emphasized that security remains paramount, particularly in protecting citizens near the frontier and preventing surprise attacks, like which occurred on October 7, 2023. That could spark wider conflict. At the same time, Jerusalem made clear it wants the dialogue to expand beyond strictly military talks to include civilian cooperation in areas such as medicine, energy, agriculture, and other fields that could benefit people on both sides. A Syrian source said, "We are ready to provide the Israeli side with security guarantees that will be acceptable to everyone in exchange for its withdrawal from Syrian territory." The Syrians are aiming to revive elements of the 1974 disengagement agreement, which crumbled following Assad's ouster. One point of contention remains regarding the Druze minority in Sueda in southern Syria. Israeli negotiators demanded a humanitarian corridor to provide support for the Druze, who suffered massacres at the hands of Bedouin militias back in July. This demand echoes previous statements by Prime Minister Netanyahu. But Israel may have to accede to Syrian demands for Sueda to remain an internal matter, exposing the community there to future assaults. While Syria is insisting that this is not full diplomatic recognition, but only a shared military and communication mechanism, it does open the window for future cooperation between these two estranged countries.
Thank you, Alec, for the report. And meanwhile, this disturbing development in Syria, violence erupted, leaving at least 9 dead, mostly civilians, as government troops clash with Kurdish militia forces in Aleppo. The violence is the worst between these sides in months, coming amid delays in implementing a March agreement to integrate Kurdish military and administration into the Syrian government. Aleppo's 2 Kurdish-majority neighborhoods have seen the brunt of the fighting, and both sides have traded blame over who started the confrontation. The escalation raises concerns about the feasibility of Syria's integration deal with the Kurds, which is critical to President al-Shara efforts to confront militias that continue to exist in Kurdish-controlled area. The clashes underscore the fragility of post-Assad Syria and the ongoing threats that could impact security across the region. Israel has long maintained informal ties with Kurdish groups in Syria, dating back decades. These ties are largely strategic. Israel sees the Kurds as a regional counterbalance to hostile actors like Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah. And Israel's decision to recognize Somaliland as an independent state is drawing strong reaction from Somalia and attention across the region. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar visited the self-declared republic just days after Israel made its historic move. ILTV's India Naftali has the details. India.
That's right, Lidar. Israel is now the first and so far the only country in the world to formally recognize Somaliland as a sovereign state. Now, just 10 days after that recognition was announced, Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar arrived in Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland, in a visit that has sparked anger from Somalia.
Somaliland, which declared independence from Somalia more than 30 years ago, has long sought international recognition. Until now, no country has formally granted it. Sa'ar said he held talks with Somaliland's president, Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi, on what he called a full range of relations, including diplomatic, economic, and civil cooperation. The Israeli foreign minister said the two sides agreed to mutual recognition, the appointment of ambassadors, and the opening of embassies in the near future.
We agreed on the mutual appointment of ambassadors and the opening of embassies. We will get that done soon. We agreed to work together to promote relations between our countries for the sake of mutual prosperity. We want to build an enduring and warm friendship, not only between governments, also between the people of Somaliland and the people of Israel.
President Abdullahi confirmed that he has accepted an invitation from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to visit Israel. He said the developing relationship goes beyond symbolic recognition and is meant to create a long-term strategic partnership.
An evolving relationship between the Republic of Somaliland and the State of Israel. It reflects not only political recognition, but also a shared commitment to transform that recognition into a substantive, forward-looking, and strategic partnership.
Somalia, however, has strongly condemned Israel's decision and Sa'ar's visit, calling the recognition an unlawful step and a serious violation of its sovereignty. Somalia maintains that Somaliland is a part of its territory and described the visit as an unacceptable interference in its internal affairs. But Israel has stressed that the decision to recognize Somaliland was not intended as a move against any other country.
And joining us now with more on the latest in the region is Iftach Bulman, geopolitics expert from the Middle East Learning Academy and Bar Ilan University. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the Islamic Republic of Iran, sort of the head of the octopus. There's a growing tension in the region that a second war with Iran may be imminent, especially after U.S. President Trump warned that the United States would intervene should the regime kill protesters, which we now know it is doing. Do you share that assessment? Are we headed for another confrontation with the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Well, if you mean Israel, well, naturally Israel wants to protect itself from any escalating threat coming from Iran. Therefore, it will engage against any evidence of force buildup by the Iranian regime, such as moving of nuclear-related materials or changing in and around the nuclear sites of Iran. And of course, we understand that Iran is reconstructing its ballistic missile array, which proved to be a very effective weapon against Israel. And so the IDF will be poised to launch an attack against that kind of an arsenal. However, there seems to be somewhat of a catch-22 here, as the demonstrations of Iran might lead the regime to see an Israeli attack as the lesser evil. Therefore, it can facilitate a narrative that the Iranians need to all unite in the face of an outside attack on the country, enabling the regime to crack down more forcibly against the demonstrators. Therefore, we might see Israel operating against the Islamic Republic's armament in a more covert manner, potentially using assets on the ground, much like we saw before October 7 in the beginning of Rising Lion operation. But as far as the U.S. And Trump's threat, I think that might lead for a combined operation which will, in a sense, kill two birds in one stone.
I know we've talked about the prospects of war. Let's talk for a moment about the prospects of peace. Moving on to Syria, you know, the Paris talks are being hailed as somewhat of a breakthrough. What exactly does this mean, and is normalization on the table as well?
Well, the Paris talks between Syria and Israel yielded one key element, at the very least, which was the beginning of coordination between the Syrian and Israeli security forces, a deconfliction mechanism of sorts. It's too early to call it a cooperation or a collaboration between the two governments. However, it does provide insight about the future milestones of this relationship, meaning security arrangements in southern Syria, in incorporation of other states, potentially, like Jordan is incorporated in the most recent understandings, and obviously the U.S., some sort of a mechanism to be put in place in favor of the Druze and the Syrian Golan to be receiving aid and protection, and some sort of a joint oversight by both Syria and Israel's IDF over the disarmament of different factions in southern Syria. So it does give us hope for future normalization agreement, but I wouldn't prepare the red ribbon just yet for the future agreement.
And how does Somaliland tie into Israel's strategic outlook? I mean, the foreign minister is visiting the country today after Israel recognized Somaliland. What is the purpose of the visit, and how does it tie into Israel's, sort of strategic outlook?
Well, the sudden recognition of Somaliland tells us that finally Israel is adopting diplomacy as part of its geopolitical game, not just using weapons or military deterrence for its geopolitical aspects. Now, it's been mentioned that Somaliland can be used as a jumping point for future attacks against the Houthis across the coast, especially if or when Israel engages against Iran. By the way, both for Israel's aerial vehicles and naval vehicles in a potential attack. However, Sarah's visit does demonstrate that Israel is formally backing this embrace of Somaliland and with political aspects, and potentially in cooperation with the Emirates that has invested in the country extensively in the past. So this could be seen as a more regional move rather than just Israel connecting with Somaliland.
All right, so a lot of developments here in the region. We'll, of course, continue to follow. Iftar Bulman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And moving on, a deadly and chaotic night in Jerusalem. A 14-year-old ultra-Orthodox boy was killed and several others injured after a bus ran into Haredi protesters during a violent anti-draft demonstration. A preliminary police investigation finds the bus driver was attacked by rioters who blocked the road before the fatal incident. ILTV's Deva Klein has the latest.
A 14-year-old ultra-Orthodox teen was killed and several others were injured when a bus drove into Haredi protesters during an anti-draft riot in Jerusalem. The incident took place at the busy intersection of Yirmiyahu and Shamgar streets, where hundreds of demonstrators had gathered. According to Magen David Adom, the teenager was trapped underneath the bus and pronounced dead at the scene from severe multi-system trauma. 3 other pedestrians were also injured, including 2 minors aged 14 and 17. Medics say some were hit on Shamgar Street while the bus continued to Ohel Yehoshua Street, where it struck another pedestrian. Police say a preliminary investigation found the driver was attacked by rioters who were blocking the road and damaging vehicles before the incident occurred. He was arrested at the scene and taken in for questioning. According to Channel 12, the driver told investigators he was trying to escape after protesters surrounded his bus and had called police to report the attack. The investigation is ongoing. Authorities say that rioters set fires, burned dumpsters, blocked roads, threw objects and eggs at police, and attacked journalists, some of whom required medical treatment afterwards. Security forces moved in to disperse what they described as a violent disturbance. Police warn that violent rioting, blocking roads, and attacking vehicles cross a red line and endanger lives. The incident comes amid escalating tensions over military conscription, with the draft debate continuing to deeply divide Israeli society. President Isaac Herzog called the incident a wake-up call for us all, saying the country experienced a sad and painful night. He warned that violence is crossing a red line and urged all sides to show responsibility, lower the flames, and prevent further disaster. Herzog said he trusts the police to carry out a swift and thorough investigation, offered condolences to the family of the boy, and wished a full recovery to all those who have been injured.
And for the first time in weeks, progress is being made towards advancing phase 2 of the ceasefire, as Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Red Cross have once again begun their search for the last remaining hostage, Ran Gvili. In the meantime, Israel is pushing ahead with major changes to its defense posture as the IDF prepares for what Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir calls the possibility of a surprise war. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz reports on the latest developments in Israel's military and civilian readiness.
At the Leaders on the Home Front conference, IDF Chief Eyal Zamir said the military is rebuilding its strategy around the lessons of October 7th. He stressed that the IDF has already made changes to readiness to orders and addressed operational gaps. Zamir made clear that Israel's approach has shifted, declaring there will be no more containment, and vowed the country will not allow terror groups or Iranian proxies to entrench themselves along its borders. He highlighted that civilian resilience is now central to Israel's security, telling local leaders that their ability to function during emergencies directly affects IDF operations. He praised cooperation during recent conflicts, including last year's war with Iran, saying a strong home front gives the military the quiet it needs to operate. Meanwhile, Israel Aerospace Industries has tested a new integrated border defense system combining real-time intelligence from land, air, sea, and space into one operational picture using radar, drones, UAVs, and autonomous vehicles. IAI says it can respond quickly to threats in any conditions while reducing risk to soldiers. They call it a first-of-its-kind solution, merging lessons from past wars with advanced technology. But despite these advances, a new report by State Comptroller Netanyahu Engelman shows Israel's civilian front remains vulnerable. About one-third of the population, about 3.2 million people, lack access to adequate bomb shelters. The audit into the October 7th war finds years of warnings did not lead to real readiness, forcing civilians and local authorities to improvise. The worst failures were in rocket and missile protection. More than 11% of public shelters were unfit. Oversight was sporadic, and a national municipal protection program was frozen without alternatives provided. Schools were also unprepared, with nearly 40% unable to move students to shelters in time. Engelman calls for urgent, fully funded national programs to secure the home front, warning that without them, Israel's civilian resilience remains at risk. The report underscores the challenges facing Israel, strengthening the military while ensuring that citizens and communities are properly protected.
And the IDF carried out a raid at Birzeit University near Ramallah that was aimed at preventing a pro-terror gathering and disrupting activity linked to Hamas-aligned student groups on campus. According to the Army, intelligence indicated that a gathering in support of terrorism was expected to take place at the university. IDF troops and border police entered the area as the event began, using crowd dispersal measures and firing warning shots before successfully disbanding the crowd. The IDF says that later a separate and more serious disturbance developed, involving hundreds of suspects. During that incident, stones and rocks were thrown at Israeli forces from rooftops, creating what the army described as an immediate threat to life. Troops responded with additional riot control measures and live fire aimed at central violent instigators. The IDF stressed that the operation was conducted to prevent terror incitement and violence, and says it will continue to act against any attempts to use academic institutions as platforms for supporting terrorism. And moving on, hundreds of Jews from across Israel and North America closed out 2025 not with speeches, but with action. Running, rolling, and walking together in the Negev. They took part in Adi's 4th annual Race for Inclusion, a powerful celebration of ability, healing, and hope.
Wow, what a fun day today here at Adi Negev Nahalat Eiran. We just completed 2.5 kilometers of the Race for Inclusion, a race that brings together people from all different abilities to celebrate Jewish unity and strength. More than 400 high school, gap year, and college students from North America gathered at Adi Negev Nahalat Eiran last week to take part in the 4th annual Race for Inclusion, a 2.5-kilometer fun run through the 40-acre rehabilitation village. Participants came through programs including Jewish National Fund USA's Alternative Winter Break and the Alexander Muss High School in Israel. They were joined by rehabilitating IDF soldiers, members of Adi's wheelchair basketball team, staff, volunteers, and residents crossing the finish line side by side. At the start of the race, Adi's Director of Advancement, Ellie Klein, reminded participants that this run carries a deeper meaning.
There are so many people of your age, college campuses across America, communities around the world who are running, do evil things to promote hatred, promote division. But you decided to be here today at Adi Negev Nahalat Eiran to promote love and inclusion.
For Klein, the symbolism of running here is impossible to separate from the events of October 7, 2023, when terrorists passed just outside the village on their way to Ofakim.
They want to advance hope, they want to advance healing, and they want to allow us to focus, to highlight on our humanity.
Adi Negev serves people of every background and ability, from residents with severe disabilities to war-wounded soldiers and civilians receiving treatment at the Kaylee Rehabilitation Medical Center, the first and only fully dedicated rehabilitation hospital in southern Israel.
We have so many different types of people who are coming here, all levels of ability. We have Jews, Israeli Arabs, Bedouins, Druze. The bottom line is that when they come here, they just focus on their humanity. All the stuff that we love to argue about, our politics, our religion, our background, we leave it at the door.
For the young participants, the experience was personal and eye-opening.
There were so many supportive, happy people there when you ran past the finish line.
I really believe in helping out this community of special needs and people with all different disabilities, so I want to be here and show my support for them.
As music played and a dance party broke out at the finish line, the message was clear: everyone belongs.
I think being able to do something that so many people with disabilities normally wouldn't be able to do, like running, is so incredible because, we're making it so that everyone can do it.
And for many, that joy said everything.
How was it? Wow, that was wonderful, so great. We're here on the breaks like this. Wow, we don't say walks in the road. That was so fun, so fun.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies are expected around the country tonight, with temperatures reaching lows of 12 degrees Celsius or 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we'll see partly cloudy skies alongside steady temperatures with highs of 23 degrees Celsius or 74 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels and keep up with us on social media. That's at ILTV_Israel on all platforms. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Ladar Gravelazi. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.
Back to ILTV on the hour. I am Devo Klein coming to you live from Israel with all of the top stories of Israel and the region. A new report by Kan News claims that last night Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told ministers in his cabinet that Washington has given Jerusalem the green light to renew an offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The report does not cite any sources, but does say that both Israel and Washington are dissatisfied with the Lebanese government's efforts to curb Hezbollah's power. This report comes amid continued Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon on the terror group's positions, with the latest airstrike targeting a member of Hezbollah's aerial unit. He was tasked with re-establishing Hezbollah's aerial arsenal. With Hezbollah's continuous attempts to rebuild and rearm on Israel's border in violation of the 2024 ceasefire agreement, paired with the Lebanese failure to control the terror group, speculation grows that an Israeli assault on Hezbollah is imminent and could occur at any point. And on the Gaza front, this morning, the IDF identified a projectile being fired from Gaza City. The failed projectile was aimed at Israeli communities in southern Israel, but did not cross the border line. Instead, the projectile fell short in an open area near a hospital in northern Gaza, shortly after the IDF struck the position from which the projectile was fired. This strike follows a string of targeted strikes on senior terrorists across the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, the United States is still pushing for Phase 2 of the Gaza deal. A worrying report from Axios claims that Washington plans to begin Phase 2 of the agreement before Hamas is disarmed and before the body of the final Israeli hostage is returned. The Red Cross and Hamas have yesterday renewed search and rescue efforts to locate the body of Master Sergeant Ran Gvili, with today marking day 825 of his captivity. There is daylight between Washington and Jerusalem, as reports indicate that the Trump administration has made clear to Netanyahu that it remains committed to both goals, disarming Hamas and bringing home the remains of Gvili, but at the same time is not prepared to condition the start of Phase 2 on either. And according to Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israel's Negev region is out of control. Crime and gang violence has spiked dramatically in the Negev region, and national efforts are ongoing to restore law and order. When touring the region with Defense Minister Katz and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu described the region as a merging front of criminal and security threats, including tens of thousands of illegal weapons confiscated. The ministers and Netanyahu discussed a comprehensive 5-year plan to combat the rising crime rates. Have a listen.
אנחנו באים להחזיר את הנגב למדינת ישראל. זה אומר התיישבות בקנה מידה שלא הכרנו. זה אומר הסדרה גם לתושבים הבדואים, אבל זה אומר בראש ובראשונה החזרת חוק וסדר. הנגב משתולל. אנחנו נרסן אותו, והתחילה פעולה חשובה של משטרת ישראל בשילוב כוחות אחרים. כדי לרסן אותו אנחנו צריכים להבין שהאיום הפלילי והאיום הביטחוני מתמזגים זה בזה, עם רבבות כלי נשק, עם רחפנים שחוצים גבולות ועם איומים אחרים. לכן אנחנו נביא פרויקט לאומי להשגת כל המטרות האלה, אבל בראש ובראשונה להחזיר את המשילות לנגב.
And Australia has announced they will launch a federal royal commission into the Bondi Beach terror massacre after weeks of pressure from the Jewish community and the victims' families. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced the inquiry to be led by former High Court Justice Virginia Bell, who will examine both the ISIS-inspired attack that killed 15 people during a Hanukkah celebration and the broader rise of anti-Semitism and extremism in Australia. Jewish leaders are welcoming the move as a long overdue step toward accountability, saying the commission's powers to summon witnesses and issue binding recommendations are essential for both justice and future protection. And that is a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. Scan the QR code on your screen to get access to our ILTV app for all of the latest developments coming out of Israel and the broader region. I am Devo Klein, and thank you so much for watching.
Welcome to ILTV Security Brief. I'm Kalev Ben David. Each week, we focus on the latest developments in security and defense relating to Israel and the Middle East, impacting on this region and beyond. And we start with our top items of the past week. Protests in Iran intensify throughout the country as security forces gun down dozens of demonstrators in the streets. The regime blames Israel for the unrest. Prime Minister Netanyahu warns that any Iranian attack would have grave consequences, while reportedly conveying a message to Russian leader Vladimir Putin that Israel has no plans to strike Iran. President Trump warns Iran's leaders the U.S. will hit them very hard if protesters continue to be killed by the regime's security forces. Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei remains defiant after U.S. forces seize his ally, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, to face charges of sponsoring narco-terrorism, declaring that Iran will bring the enemy to its knees. The IDF carries out a wave of airstrikes across Lebanon, destroying weapons storage warehouses and military installations both above and below ground belonging to Hezbollah and Hamas. In a later incident, an Israeli airstrike eliminates 2 terrorists attempting to rebuild the group's military infrastructure in the Khirbet Salem area of South Lebanon. During its ongoing operations in Gaza, the IDF dismantles 2 kilometers of Hamas terror tunnels built in northern Gaza, and also launches an airstrike against a Hamas operative in southern Gaza, preparing to carry out an attack on Israeli forces in the area. And now our big story. It has been a very bad week for the Iranian regime. Street protests that initially began focused on economic hardships have widened across the country and intensified with calls to overthrow the regime. Security forces have gunned down dozens of demonstrators and arrested thousands, drawing a warning from President Trump that the U.S. may intervene if the killing continues. Meanwhile, American forces seized one of Iran's closest allies, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, spiriting him away from Caracas to New York to face criminal charges. Naturally, Iran is blaming the U.S. and especially Israel for its troubles, raising concerns a desperate regime could carry out a risky military action as a distraction.
اقداماتی یا اظهاراتی که امثال نخست وزیر رژیم صهیونیستی یا برخی از مقام‌های رادیکال آمریکایی، مقام‌های تندرو آمریکایی در رابطه با مباحث داخلی ایران مطرح می‌کنند به تروریسم، ترغیب به آدمکشی. جمهوری اسلامی ایران، نیروهای مسلح ما با چشمان باز مراقب حریم ایران هستند و قرار نیست ما به حرف‌های رژیم صهیونیستی اتکا بکنیم یا اعتماد بکنیم. برای ما فریبکاری این رژیم ثابت شده است. تمام توان با همه وجود مراقب رفتارهای طرف‌های مقابل هستیم و در دفاع از کیان ایران نیروهای مسلح ما ذره‌ای اهمال و اغماض نخواهند کرد.
And joining us now for more is Iran expert Seema Shine. She's a former official of the Mossad, now a senior researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies here in Israel. And from Washington, D.C., we're joined by Behnam Ben Teleblu, senior director of the Iran program at the Foundation of Defense for Democracies. Thank you for joining us both. Behnam, I want to start with you and the Venezuelan connection. How important was it to Iran? What did Iran actually benefit from that? And what may be the impact if the Maduro successors, whoever they may be, move away from their alliance with Iran?
Well, it's a great question, and greetings to you, Caleb, and to Seema as well. Listen, this has been not just a bad year, but a bad 2 years when you're looking at state-level partnerships or state-level allies of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Make no mistake, for the past 46 years, the Islamic Republic hasn't really had a lot of state-level partners. Its most consistent one was the Assad regime in Syria. It's tried to export the revolution for 4 decades in the Western Hemisphere and in Latin America as well, relying on the downtrodden and dispossessed, as well as the Lebanese and Palestinian diaspora. But with Venezuela, it found a state-level partner. Venezuela was a strategic launching point for Iranian influence there, to create another transnational terrorist apparatus there, to support the arms manufacturing of the Venezuelan government there. There's drone ties, there's missile ties, and potentially there could be narco-trafficking ties if more deeply explored. But make no mistake, Iran lost yet another state-level partner in the early days of 2026. So this is a rollback of the Islamic Republic's reach and influence around the world, and particularly with respect to the Western Hemisphere, where Trump, in his second term, is looking to show more strength than in term one.
And Seema, Behnam talked about the practical consequences, implications of Maduro's, but how much is that important in terms of a message to the Iranian regime that President Trump may be willing to take unprecedented action, some even suggesting directly against the supreme leader himself, as Maduro was targeted?
Yeah, that's a very important element in the whole big story of Venezuela and the implications for Iran. First of all, I want to remind us that President Trump has said that he will come to the rescue of the demonstrators if they will be killed in big numbers. And he said it before Venezuela. And then the second time he mentioned it was when he made this press conference talking about the event in Venezuela and mentioning the previous times that he has done something with Iran. One is the assassination of Soleimani, and the second, the attack on the nuclear program. So not only that he connected the event in Venezuela to Iran, but he also mentioned those events when he attacked Iran directly, Iran or personnel in Iran. Now, if you remember, at the end of the war between Israel and Iran, during the war, there were some Israeli officials that have been saying that Israel has to go after the leader. Now, there was a debate around that, and Trump was the one who said that he prevented Israel from doing it. So if I combine all together, that's a direct message to the leader and to the leadership in Iran, saying that was at June 25 that I said that I saved you. But now, that is what I'm saying. If you do that and that, and he mentioned if they kill many people, we will go after you. So I think it's a direct threat on the leadership, the leader himself, and the Iranian leadership as a whole.
All right, well, that certainly is unprecedented. But, Behnam, let's look at the internal protests within Iran. We've seen this, unfortunately, scenario before, widespread demonstrations. Somehow the regime has managed to quell it using brute force. Is there something fundamentally different about what is happening now in Iran compared to those past times?
Absolutely, there is. Well, that thing that is fundamentally different has to do with timing and strategic context. But make no mistake, these protests are also important because they're the same. What we've seen starting in the winter of 2017 to present is a boom and bust cycle of protests that, if you link them together, looks more like, in terms of class, age, geography, demography, slogans chanted, and even the level of violence that the state has weaponized against the street. All of this points to an 8-year national uprising, and fits and starts, admittedly, against the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it looks like it was always going to be a matter of when rather than if Iranians would take out to the streets again. Because what all of those protests, despite the economic trigger, the environmental trigger, the social trigger we've seen for every round of protests over the past 8 years, all of them at their heart have fundamentally political grievances. Fundamentally, they are increasingly targeting the heart of the Islamic Republic itself, its ideology, its politics, its policymakers. And they're more and more willing than ever before to grab third rails. Like in this most recent demonstration now, we're on day 11, the most overt calls with respect to the name of the son of the late Shah of Iran or calling for the exiled crown prince to return, willing to touch these political third rails and express not just what they're against, but what they're for. So for that sense, they're more of the same, but also they're unprecedented. Now, briefly with respect to timing and strategic context, this is the first multi-day, multi-city national uprising in Iran since the end of the 12-day war. For that purpose alone, all of the analysts and experts who said that Israel's strike or America's strike during the 12-day war would have short-circuited Iran's protest movements are dead wrong. That's one. Two, with respect to being the next major, now at least 23 or 24 provinces of Iran's 31 different provinces that have been seeing some level of unrest in the past 11 days now. This shows that this is the biggest, most largest nationwide multi-day uprising since the Women Life Freedom movements of 2022 and 2023 that at its height touched 150 different cities, towns, and villages. So when you put this together, what it brings from more of the same, what it brings with respect to the strategic context, makes this a very critical moment. And especially as you get towards February 11th, which is the Islamic Republic's 47th birthday, perhaps it might not be around, perhaps it will be around, but no doubt policymakers with respect to the Islamic Republic will have a very unhappy few days ahead.
Right. And Seema, you mentioned the sort of unprecedented warning from President Trump. Prime Minister Netanyahu, as he has in the past, also offering verbal messages of support for the Iranian people. But what should the U.S., Israel perhaps go beyond that in terms of actual actions taken? We've just heard Benham suggest that the 12-day war, the strikes on Iran may have perhaps even encouraged the population there. Is there something more the U.S. and Israel could be doing, and what are the potential risks of that?
So there is a huge argument against and pros any involvement. At the end of the day, what we see is that the regime is trying to for sure, as if these events are manipulated by outside forces. And I think we should, if there are options to support the people that are on the streets in a way that will not be a public way, of course, and not in a way that will be the regime will be able to pinpoint to Israel or to the US, it will be better. Because at the end of the day, it will come, no question, and when it will come from inside. So I think it's very important that neither Israel nor the US talk too much. It's different when the president is saying something very direct on the killing of people in the streets. I think that's very important. And I think that what we see in Iran today, that there are less numbers of killed people. It's not everyone is very important, but it's not the numbers that we could see where I think if there was not the threat coming from Trump directly. So in this case, it's very important. But it should be very much understood that Israel is and the US is not in direct connection to the people in the street. They are doing it because of their own reasons, and the reasons were mentioned were mentioned before by Benham. I want to add to that one more thing, and that is the despair of the people. There is no hope. Since there is no dialogue with the US, no option of a removal of sanctions, there is no hope for a better time. So it's all the problems that already have been said, and add to that despair in people that don't think that there is any chance for a hope. So I think it's important to support, if you can, under the radar. It's important that the president has said, don't kill your own people, and stand behind that. But we shouldn't encourage them too much openly because it plays into the hands of the regime.
Right. And briefly, Benham, how much support does the Shah's son, you mentioned, actually have in Israel after openly calling for support of this strike later this week?
Well, with respect to the popularity of his son in Israel, I know he's quite popular among the Iranian Jewish community. I can't speak to the levels of support that he may have among lay people in Israel that are not Mizrahi or not of Iranian Jewish origin. But with respect to Israeli political elite, no doubt Minister Gamliel has spoken with him, tweeted about him several times. It remains to be seen, even within Israel's multi-factional, multi-party democracy, which, as you know, can be cacophonous and rancorous. And I don't need to tell you guys, it's going to be electoral season there soon. One wonders how the politics of the Iran issue may factor in with respect to Bibi and his competition. But I think there's no doubt that since the Crown Prince's trip there in 2023, there was really a historic opening for potentially pushing past the Islamic Republic with Israelis, with Jews, and with Iranians.
All right. I want to ask Seema Benham, just stay with us because I want to look at another issue that is connected with Iran. After decades of war and hostility, are Israel and Syria now heading to establishing friendly relations or any kind of relations? Well, U.S. mediators of talks between envoys from Jerusalem and Damascus are expressing optimism of a possible breakthrough in reaching agreements on security and other issues. Our Alec Pollard has that story.
This week in Paris, during a third round of discreet negotiations, senior Israeli and Syrian officials agreed to a joint communication mechanism to de-escalate conflict, share intelligence, and explore economic opportunities. Israeli leaders emphasized that security remains paramount, particularly in protecting citizens near the frontier and preventing surprise attacks, like which occurred on October 7, 2023. That could spark wider conflict. At the same time, Jerusalem made clear it wants the dialogue to expand beyond strictly military talks to include civilian cooperation in areas such as medicine, energy, agriculture, and other fields that could benefit people on both sides. A Syrian source said, "We are ready to provide the Israeli side with security guarantees that will be acceptable to everyone in exchange for its withdrawal from Syrian territory." The Syrians are aiming to revive elements of the 1974 disengagement agreement, which crumbled following Assad's ouster. One point of contention remains regarding the Druze minority in Sueda in southern Syria. Israeli negotiators demanded a humanitarian corridor to provide support for the Druze, who suffered massacres at the hands of Bedouin militias back in July. This demand echoes previous statements by Prime Minister Netanyahu. But Israel may have to accede to Syrian demands for Sueda to remain an internal matter, exposing the community there to future assaults. While Syria is insisting that this is not full diplomatic recognition, but only a shared military and communication mechanism, it does open the window for future cooperation between these two estranged countries.
Seema, as Alec showed there are some serious issues still between Israel and Syria. One thing they do share is a common enemy, Iran, the Iranian regime. How important would it be, or how significant, if Israel and Syria could at least reach some kind of security agreements that has them working against Iranian interests in the region?
Well, first of all, I think it's a very important development, the three parties committee that will be meeting in Jordan. I think it's very important. I assume it is part of an American push that they wanted to put in a mechanism that will, first of all, deal with deconfliction. I think this is very important because this is part of the problem between Israel and Syria. So a deconfliction issue will be very a way of dealing will be very important. That's one thing. The other one, I think, it's not only, of course, Iran. It's also Hezbollah, who was fighting in Syria. So the common enemy of Iran and Hezbollah is one of the issues that are could connect Israel and Syria. I think it will be very important if Israel cooperate on intelligence with Syria on these issues in order to prevent any smuggling of money and weapons from Iran to Hezbollah and vice versa, or different groups in Syria that are also connected from the past, the Alawites and others that might be part of them might be connected to the Iranians. So there is the one issue, and other issues are the issues of the border. Israel doesn't want to see the border with any new enemy, either if it is local cells of Hamas or jihadists, other jihadists, and of course Israel doesn't want to see any Turkish presence on our border. It's not an enemy from my point of view. Turkey is not an enemy, but Israel would prefer not to see it. So I think there are many many issues that are important for Israel and Syria, and I think that it will be possible to achieve those elements, and Israel will go back to the 1974 border. With this and other, perhaps of the Hermon might be something that will be a special arrangement, but I think it's important both for Israel and both for Syria, and it's an opening for the future.
And Behnam, this brings us back to your earlier point that this is part of not just the issue of the last few days, weeks, months, but even years in which the geopolitical situation of Iran in the region has been weakened.
Precisely. Fast-moving sands there, particularly in the boom and bust cycle of violence in the post-October 7 Middle East. Really one of the big losers, you could say, is the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran and Israel's military successes against its proxies, its sole state partner, and later on American involvement against its nuclear program really have began to really confine what's left of the threat from the Islamic Republic really to one tool almost exclusively. It's not the only threat, but it's the most prominent threat at this moment, and that would be the ballistic missile threat, because otherwise the regime really has been rolled back almost to its own borders.
Right. Again, Seema, any chance that Iran, under this kind of pressure, may lash out, for example, against Israel?
Yeah, this is a concern that we hear in Israel. I think this is also standing behind the reports that we get that Prime Minister Netanyahu has spoken with President Putin and has delivered the message to the Iranians that we are not going to attack. But I do think that there is dual concerns. In Iran, there is a concern that Israel might use the current internal situation in order to lash and strike on the missiles. In the Israeli side, there is a concern that Iran will try to make the problems inside to bring them externally to a war with Israel. I think both sides don't want a war in this time.
All right, Seema Shine, Behnam Ben Teleblu from the FDD, INSS. Seema, thank you for joining us on ILTV Security Brief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now a final word. President Trump and other U.S. officials cited multiple justifications for the seizure of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. There is his regime's involvement in narco-terrorism as the Trump administration targets the import of narcotics into America, the repeated corruption and overturning of Venezuela's democratic electoral processes that have spurred U.S. and EU sanctions. And there's the regime's abrogation of American oil contracts and its role in the contraband trade in sanctioned oil that has benefited U.S. superpower rivals Russia and China. Now, the Maduro government's close ties with the Iranian regime was not given as a primary reason for Maduro's arrest, although those two work heavily against U.S. and Western interests. Iran's oil and shipping industries has played a key role in aiding Venezuela's own energy sector, enabling it to mitigate the impact of U.S. sanctions and evade trade restrictions. Iran and Venezuelan military and security sectors have also closely cooperated, including in the development of weapons technology utilized by both regimes and their allies. And Venezuela has provided Iranian agents and proxies with a forward base in South and Central America. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said following Maduro's capture that the U.S. will pressure the Venezuelan leadership going forward so that, quote, they no longer cozy up to Iran and Hezbollah in our atmosphere. But it is a disturbing sign that the Trump administration at this stage has reportedly decided to try and work with Maduro's vice president and successor, Delcy Rodriguez, rather than support opposition leaders such as the Nobel Peace Prize winner Marina Corina Machado. If the Trump administration is truly serious about changing Venezuela's behavior, including its close cooperation with Iran, it is hard to see how that is possible with a leadership still in place that has demonstrated decades of loyalty to Maduro and his corrupt policies. And much of the same also can be said about Iran itself. The Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei and his cronies responded with verbal defiance to President Trump's warning that the U.S. would hit Iran hard if more protesters were killed in the streets. And the regime's security forces answered with live fire that shot down dozens of more demonstrators. Now, the U.S. seizure of Nicolas Maduro after repeated warnings to the Venezuelan dictator, as well as its bombings of Iran's nuclear facilities last year, show clearly that President Trump is more willing than his predecessors to use America's military might to further its national interests. But Trump's rhetoric does sometimes exceed the limits of the actions he is actually willing to take in order to avoid the extended foreign entanglements that he criticized past administrations for getting involved in. Unfortunately, when it comes to Venezuela, and especially to Iran, there are no quick fixes to the challenges that they pose to President Trump's desire to reassert America's deterrent capability against hostile regimes. Changing the fundamental situations in both Caracas and Tehran will require extended and extensive U.S. diplomatic, economic, and military campaigns. At this stage, one can only hope that the Trump administration is prepared for that kind of commitment, including making the effort to convince the broadest American public possible that it is in their interest to support such policies. Now, Israel's own security will greatly benefit if this is indeed the case, as will that of the entire Western world. But the biggest potential winners or losers here, if this is not the case, are the long-suffering peoples of Venezuela and Iran, who do deserve their moment of deliverance, their new year of freedom and potential prosperity after decades of corrupt and repressive rule. Thank you for joining ILTV Security Brief.
And joining us now with more on the latest in the region is Iftach Bulman, geopolitics expert from the Middle East Learning Academy and Bar Ilan University. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the Islamic Republic of Iran, sort of the head of the octopus. There's a growing tension in the region that a second war with Iran may be imminent, especially after U.S. President Trump warned that the United States would intervene should the regime kill protesters, which we now know it is doing. Do you share that assessment? Are we headed for another confrontation with the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Well, if you mean Israel, well, naturally Israel wants to protect itself from any escalating threat coming from Iran. Therefore, it will engage against any evidence of force buildup by the Iranian regime, such as moving of nuclear-related materials or changing in and around the nuclear sites of Iran. And of course, we understand that Iran is reconstructing its ballistic missile array, which proved to be a very effective weapon against Israel. And so the IDF will be poised to launch an attack against that kind of an arsenal. However, there seems to be somewhat of a catch-22 here, as the demonstrations of Iran might lead the regime to see an Israeli attack as the lesser evil. Therefore, it can facilitate the narrative that the Iranians need to all unite in the face of an outside attack on the country, enabling the regime to crack down more forcibly against the demonstrators. Therefore, we might see Israel operating against the Islamic Republic's armament in a more covert manner, potentially using assets on the ground, much like we saw before October 7 in the beginning of Rising Lion operation. But as far as the U.S. And Trump's threat, I think that might lead for a combined operation which will, in a sense, kill two birds in one stone.
I know we've talked about the prospects of war. Let's talk for a moment about the prospects of peace. Moving on to Syria, you know, the Paris talks are being hailed as somewhat of a breakthrough. What exactly does this mean, and is normalization on the table as well?
Well, the Paris talks between Syria and Israel yielded one key element, at the very least, which was the beginning of coordination between the Syrian and Israeli security forces, a deconfliction mechanism of sorts. It's too early to call it a cooperation or a collaboration between the two governments. However, it does provide insight about the future milestones of this relationship, meaning security arrangements in southern Syria, in incorporation of other states, potentially, like Jordan is incorporated in the most recent understandings, and obviously the US. Some sort of a mechanism to be put in place in favor of the Druze and the Syrian Golan to be receiving aid and protection, and some sort of a joint oversight by both Syria and Israel's IDF over the disarmament of different factions in southern Syria. So it does give us hope for future normalization agreement, but I wouldn't prepare the red ribbon just yet for the future agreement.
Mm-hmm. And how does Somaliland tie into Israel's strategic outlook? I mean, the foreign minister is visiting the country today after Israel recognized Somaliland. What is the purpose of the visit, and how does it tie into Israel's, sort of strategic outlook?
Well, the sudden recognition of Somaliland tells us that finally Israel is adopting diplomacy as part of its geopolitical game. Not just using weapons or military deterrence for its geopolitical aspects. Now, it's been mentioned that Somaliland can be used as a jumping point for future attacks against the Houthis across the coast, especially if or when Israel engages against Iran. By the way, both for Israel's aerial vehicles and naval vehicles in a potential attack. However, Sarah's visit does demonstrate that Israel is formally backing this embrace of Somaliland and with political aspects, and potentially in cooperation with the Emirates, that has invested in the country extensively in the past. So this could be seen as a more regional move rather than just Israel connecting with Somaliland.
All right, so a lot of developments here in the region. Will, of course, continue to follow. Iftar Bulman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, now joining us to discuss the latest of what's happening on the ground inside Iran is Iranian dissident and one of London's most active voices for a free Iran, Lily Mu. Lily Daroud, thank you so much for being with us today at ILTV. To start, what is happening right now on the ground with the uprisings in Iran?
Durud and Shalom, thank you for having me. What is being witnessed in Iran right now is the most unprecedented act of unity amongst everyday Iranians, businessmen and family men, even children and women coming to the streets of Iran and calling for a downfall of the regime, death to the dictator. And they are also openly and clearly in English calling out for the return of King Reza Pahlavi, because they do see an alternative out of this regime. They do see a free Iran out of this, the Ayatollah's regime. Also, like you mentioned earlier in your report, when you were talking about Iran, they are using ambulances to bring in regime forces or to take Iranian prisoners into unknown places. And what we are witnessing is an absolute symmetry and complete identical behavior of the regime forces and Hamas being exactly the same, using ambulances, which is a civilian vehicle, to deliver terrorists to actually hit and hurt and kill Iranians.
Now, what makes these protests different than perhaps other previous uprisings that we've seen from the Iranian people?
These protests feel much more secure for the people in a sense that there is going to be international support for them, because Iranian people have proven time and time again that they are willing to give their lives for dignity and freedom. But this time they truly know that after the 12-day war and the depletion of the proxies of the Islamic Republic, there is only way forward, and there is only a downfall for the regime. Iranian people have collectively come together, and they have chosen their alternative and a transition and a leader of opposition for a transition period. They have made it clear that this is not just an uprising for economic crisis, even though the economy of the country has completely collapsed and the value of the rial has completely collapsed. It's an absolute insult on a wealthy nation of Iran, and it's an absolute insult on Iranian people to see their men, women, and children being killed while their brave acts of resistance is being ignored in the international community. So we Iranians truly appreciate the allyship and the work that our Israeli friends and American friends are doing in order to send the word of Iranian people out there into the international community. We all know there is a blackout on Iran, and we all know somehow the news of Iranian people is not important enough. While our civilians die, it's only important for a certain group of self-appointed saviors of the international community to go and put their fists in the air and call for the freedom of a dictator from New York into Venezuela, while Venezuelan people are screaming in joy and their tears are flooding with joy into the world right now. So congratulations to the Venezuelans. Hopefully Iran next.
Now, we've seen calls across many provinces inside Iran for the return of the Shah. How prevalent is this sentiment? And do you think that Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi is getting the support that he needs from Western nations to make this revolution actually succeed and get this Islamic Republic out of power?
I believe the support the Crown Prince has from the American administration has been apparent over the past 3 years, and we are very happy and proud of that. We just hope that this time, unlike the 12-day war, when Iranians truly believe that the Shah of Iran is going to have a chance to return in June into our beautiful country and time for rebuilding will happen, this time hopefully with the actions that President Trump took against the Venezuelan leader, we know that international law is actually being practiced by some world leaders today, and hopefully it will be practiced for the Iranian people. Iranian people deserve to have freedom, and they are calling for the Pahlavi. Let us not forget, even a simple alliance with Pahlavi family is called treason and is punishable by death by this regime.
Now, we are running out of time, but I do want to ask you before I let you go, what is the most important thing for the world, the Western world, to know right now about this movement, about these protests inside Iran?
Iranian people are fighting with their bare chest against bullets. Iranian people deserve to be free, and this is their only chance. This is the only chance that the world will be free of the tyrannic and terrorist-supporting and terrorist-facilitating regime of the Ayatollah. I urge the international community to take action and join President Donald Trump in their practice of international law, R2P, responsibility to protect and help Iranian people get rid of this regime once and for all. We have lost enough bodies, we have lost enough people, even our children are being shot. And let's not forget, more than 2,000 people, Iranians, have been executed in the last year alone.
That's right. Well, we will continue to keep you updated on this story as it develops. I want to thank you, Lily Mu, for all your activism and for speaking with us today.
Thank you for your unity.
And so as Iran faces its most serious internal unrest in years, diplomatic movement is also unfolding on Israel's northern front. Reports of renewed Israel-Syria talks in Paris come as Tehran struggles to contain protests at home, raising new questions about how pressure, diplomacy, and instability may converge across the region. We're now joined by Dr. Mordechai Kedar, Middle East expert at Bar-Ilan University. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Sivan. Pleasure to be here.
Likewise. The protests in Iran have now entered a second week and spread across dozens of cities, with at least 16 people reportedly killed and hundreds arrested. Do you see this as a moment that could fundamentally reshape Iranian politics, similar to past uprisings? Could this pose a deeper threat to the regime's survival?
Definitely. What we see today is some things which are unprecedented. First of all, we see the support from Trump to the people in the streets. And this actually reminds us of the support of the President Jimmy Carter, who supported the Islamists or those who were against the Shah in 1978, and thus enabled those people to stream to the streets in big numbers, I'm talking about millions, in order to topple the Shah. And today, it's actually the same thing, but against those who took Iran over in 1979, when Trump tweets twice a warning to the regime in Iran not to shoot on demonstrators, and he actually said it in live broadcast also. So the people are very much encouraged by this support, and especially after what they saw, what happened to Maduro, because what happened to Maduro can also happen to Khamenei or to Pezeshkian. And they have many candidates to join Maduro in his jail in New York from the Iranian people's point of view. And they were very much encouraged by this, because a president who on one side warns the Iranians, on the other side abducts a killer like Maduro, can do it here as well. Why not? Let him come. Good. So this actually is one encouragement. Another thing which defines or characterizes this time of violence is that many sectors take part in these riots. Formerly, like in 2022, when the issue was the hijab, the head cover of the ladies, most of the demonstrators were ladies, especially those who want to go around without scarf. Today, we see many sectors. We see the bazaar, means the merchants. We see students. We see even kids. We see men. We see women. We see women with hijab, with a headscarf, who demonstrate against the regime of the so-called religious regime, although they look like women who identify with the regime because of the hijab, yet they are against it.
Now, from Israel's perspective, what are the risks and benefits of taking a more vocal stance?
No doubt. Netanyahu came out, I think, yesterday with a recording of a clip encouraging the Iranian people to take their fate in their hands. Means, in Arabic they say that freedom is being taken. It's never being given. And if somebody wants to be free, he has to extract the freedom from the hands of those who still stick to his freedom, means subjugate him to their orders. So that's why Netanyahu also encouraged them to run to the streets and to act against the mullahs. And this is good, because who knows what the Mossad is doing? By the way, the regime blames those who run in the streets against the regime as they are agents of the Mossad. You know what? If Israel had so many agents in Iran, very good. Why not?
Now, moving on to Syria, reports now say a new round of Israel-Syria talks is set to begin in Paris. How significant is this development?
I think that these talks are a result of a pressure which is maintained on Netanyahu by Trump, by the Saudis, and possibly by the Turkish as well. Because all these three, at least until recently, want to encourage and to strengthen and to empower al-Jolani in Syria. They want Syria to recuperate from the war which inflicted big damages on the infrastructure, on the people. They want to see Syria flourishing again, and everyone because of different reasons. The Turks want to see Syria as its proxy. The Saudis, who hate Turkey, want to see Syria their proxy. Israel wants some kind of stability for the Druze and for Israel in this order. And Trump, anyway, doesn't want to see any war anywhere. So it's some kind of meeting of expectations for many sides. So Israel, in my view, bit unwillingly sits with Jolani, because we all know that these jihadists, they could wait for 15, 16 years, as Hamas did, and one day when we fall asleep on guard, they might attack us, Giuliani included. So Israel tries to conclude the conclusions from October 7, 2023, while others try not to see it or ignore it altogether.
Dr. Mordechai Kedar, thank you very much.
No problem.
And joining us now with more on the latest global developments from Venezuela to the Islamic Republic of Iran is Fleur Hassan Nahum, Foreign Ministry Special Envoy for Trade and Innovation. Fleur, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's start with the obvious question, which is, what is the significance of the U.S. strike on Venezuela and the capture of Maduro, and what does this mean for Israel?
Well, first of all, I think it was the right thing to do for President Trump to look after the interests, his national interests. And we have here a dictatorship, a communist dictatorship, that is not only making its own people miserable, it's making the whole region unsafe. But it was a direct threat to the United States by importing drugs and importing dangerous people into the country. So he did the right thing. But I think what it signifies to the world is that America will not stop at anything to put its own interests first and will not suffer dangers and dictators and people threatening it. It will not suffer that lightly. And to me, that's a wonderful message to the Iranian regime. First of all, let's remember that Venezuela and Hezbollah and the Islamic Republic of Iran are very close. They enable each other's evil ways. And so Venezuela has been a harbor for Hezbollah and a way for Hezbollah to spread its evil intentions of Islamism in Latin America. And the other way around, Venezuela has also been a help, Hezbollah has also been a help to Maduro in Venezuela. And so you have two evil empires, one under severe protest from its own people, which we hope will succeed, and the other one which the United States have taken out a very toxic leader. If you want to even ask yourself why he's such a toxic leader, just look at how people are celebrating on the streets. He was bad for his country. Chavism is bad for Venezuela and is bad for the entire region.
Mm-hmm. And now Maduro has been ousted, but his government is still in place. And the acting president is, of course, already blaming Israel for the recent events. And we know there's also an opposition leader who recently won the Nobel Prize, dedicating it to President Trump. And then there's President Trump himself, who's saying that the United States is actually going to run the country for a while. So what happens now? I mean, what happens next? And who is running the country at the moment?
Well, that's a good question. I spoke to a friend of mine last night who is a leader of the Venezuelan forces in exile. He said to me, look, even though Maduro's gone, Chavism, the philosophy, the ideology behind it is not gone. It's still very much alive and well. So who's going to get rid of that? Are we going to see more American troops on the ground? Is Marina Corino Machado going to come back and take over as leader? Is Trump going to basically put her in that position? These are all still very open questions, but I think it's very encouraging that Trump said, we will go back in if we need to make sure that we don't leave this half done. He made it very clear last night at his press conference that he has to go back in, he will go back in. And that gives me a lot of encouragement for Gaza. What will happen now? Prime Minister Netanyahu was with Trump. Trump has given Hamas 60 days to disarm, which was supposed to happen in the 20-point deal that hasn't materialized. And I really do believe that if Trump says something, people should take him at face value, because again and again, he proves that he does what he means.
And he's certainly shown that with the strikes on Venezuela. And so I do want to pivot now to talk a little bit more about the Islamic Republic of Iran. And, you know, this has really been sort of a double blow for the regime. They've lost, as you mentioned, a key ally. But they've also received a very loud and clear message from Washington that the United States is not afraid to act to remove these anti-American regimes. I mean, what's your analysis of this? And do you believe that in the wake of the strikes on Venezuela, that a strike on Iran may also be imminent, either from Israel or from the United States, or potentially a joint strike?
Well, you know, for many different presidents so far have given warm words of encouragement to the Iranian protesters, but never actually did anything useful to help them. Trump did something incredible on Friday. He wrote and he said, Iran, if you keep shooting your protesters, we're locked and loaded. That was his language. In other words, we're ready to go in. Now, again, Trump doesn't say things he doesn't mean, and he acts on things that he says. And so if I were the Iranian Islamic regime, I'd be very nervous about what Trump has said. And you've seen a little bit more conciliatory language coming from them, saying that the protesters have legitimate concerns. This is all, you should take all this. They are scared. The Iranian regime are scared because now that America has basically said, you're not going to shoot protesters in our watch, that means that they have to be very careful. And I hope, I pray for the people of Iran that they will continue to be strong and resilient, and they will keep going until the regime is dismantled, because they are the source of the evil coming out of the Middle East that is spreading around the Middle East, but also the entire world.
Absolutely. Fleur Hassan Nahum, thank you so much for joining us and for your insights today.
Thank you so much.
And joining us now with more on the latest in Iran is Ben Sapti, an expert on Iran at the INSS. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me here. I also want to congratulate all of us and also the Iranian people for a better year, a year that we can get rid of maybe this horrible regime and live peacefully in the Middle East.
Let's certainly hope so. And you know, what started as protests over the economy seems to have spiraled into something much more. So can you maybe give us a breakdown of what's driving the current protests in Iran and how significant are they compared to past unrest?
Yes, so we are already in the 5th day of the protests, and it's kind of unusual because they are surviving the depression and they are still there. The people from many parts of Iran, many cities and many smaller cities, they are demonstrating against the regime. First, we have the bazaris, those people who are connected to the regime, and they got some foreign currency that was subsidized for them to bring some merchandise from abroad into Iran and sell it to the people. But even they cannot do that anymore because the prices are so high that even them who are connected to the regime cannot afford these prices. Of course, the ordinary people cannot afford that also. And also the students and all the depression against them, the freedom is going away and kind of vanishing. All the hijab issue is coming back to the women. So there are a lot of reasons how we see suddenly all these people coming out to many places, to many streets of Iran and protesting against the regime. The thing is, and the other thing is that the depression forces are not so active. They are not depressing them as they used to do before. We see a lot of negotiations between a policeman or a IRGC man and a protester. And when the protester says to him, you know that your salary is also so low, so how do you want to beat me? And the guy says to him, yes, you are so right. I'm also suffering from this situation. So we are in a very different kind of protest here, not like the other years.
So different protests. I mean, do they now pose a real threat to the Iranian leadership, or does the regime still maintain firm control, as we saw, let's say, in the 2022 protests?
Yes, you know, it's very early to predict this kind of situation to where it can go. I kind of hope and also can predict that these protests can go on for a few more days. Even about 5 or 10 days, it can bring the regime to make some mistakes, to depress them kind of harder, or make other mistakes like threatening other countries in the region, even Israel. It was spoken even in the other places and estimations of other Israeli news. So we can see that as long as the people are outside, the regime is weaker in its status. And also we have a very strange situation with the president. He admits all the mistakes of the regime, how they were treating so bad the people and brought the situation to that place. This is an unordinary situation that someone admits the mistakes of the regime, and this also gives the protesters the hope that they can go on with the protests. So if the regime makes more and more mistakes, it can bring us to the other situation. But it's very early to see a kind of a collapse or joining bigger parts of the depression forces to the people. This is a very early situation that we have here.
So we'll, of course, continue to follow very closely what's happening inside of Iran. And, of course, we can't forget that there's also the threat of Israeli strikes looming. Ben Sabti, thank you so much for your analysis today. And we'll continue to follow here on ILTV.
Thank you.
Back to ILTV on the hour. I am Devo Klein coming to you live from Israel with all of the top stories of Israel and the region. A new report by Khan News claims that last night Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told ministers in his cabinet that Washington has given Jerusalem the green light to renew an offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The report does not cite any sources, but does say that both Israel and Washington are dissatisfied with the Lebanese government's efforts to curb Hezbollah's power. This report comes amid continued Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon on the terror group's positions, with the latest airstrike targeting a member of Hezbollah's aerial unit. He was tasked with re-establishing Hezbollah's aerial arsenal. With Hezbollah's continuous attempts to rebuild and rearm on Israel's border in violation of the 2024 ceasefire agreement, paired with the Lebanese failure to control the terror group, speculation grows that an Israeli assault on Hezbollah is imminent and could occur at any point. And on the Gaza front, this morning, the IDF identified a projectile being fired from Gaza City. The failed projectile was aimed at Israeli communities in southern Israel, but did not cross the border line. Instead, the projectile fell short in an open area near a hospital in northern Gaza, shortly after the IDF struck the position from which the projectile was fired. This strike follows a string of targeted strikes on senior terrorists across the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, the United States is still pushing for Phase 2 of the Gaza deal. A worrying report from Axios claims that Washington plans to begin Phase 2 of the agreement before Hamas is disarmed and before the body of the final Israeli hostage is returned. The Red Cross and Hamas have yesterday renewed search and rescue efforts to locate the body of Master Sergeant Ran Gvili, with today marking day 825 of his captivity. There is daylight between Washington and Jerusalem, as reports indicate that the Trump administration has made clear to Netanyahu that it remains committed to both goals, disarming Hamas and bringing home the remains of Gvili, but at the same time is not prepared to condition the start of Phase 2 on either. And according to Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israel's Negev region is out of control. Crime and gang violence has spiked dramatically in the Negev region, and national efforts are ongoing to restore law and order. When touring the region with Defense Minister Katz and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu described the region as a merging front of criminal and security threats, including tens of thousands of illegal weapons confiscated. The ministers and Netanyahu discussed a comprehensive 5-year plan to combat the rising crime rates. Have a listen.
אנחנו באים להחזיר את הנגב למדינת ישראל. זה אומר התיישבות בקנה מידה שלא הכרנו. זה אומר הסדרה גם לתושבים הבדואים, אבל זה אומר בראש ובראשונה החזרת חוק וסדר. הנגב משתולל. אנחנו נרסן אותו, והתחילה פעולה חשובה של משטרת ישראל בשילוב כוחות אחרים. כדי לרסן אותו אנחנו צריכים להבין שהאיום הפלילי והאיום הביטחוני מתמזגים זה בזה, עם רבבות כלי נשק, עם רחפנים שחוצים גבולות ועם איומים אחרים. לכן אנחנו נביא פרויקט לאומי להשגת כל המטרות האלה, אבל בראש ובראשונה להחזיר את המשילות לנגב.
And Australia has announced they will launch a federal royal commission into the Bondi Beach terror massacre after weeks of pressure from the Jewish community and the victims' families. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced the inquiry to be led by former High Court Justice Virginia Bell, who will examine both the ISIS-inspired attack that killed 15 people during a Hanukkah celebration and the broader rise of anti-Semitism and extremism in Australia. Jewish leaders are welcoming the move as a long overdue step toward accountability, saying the Commission's powers to summon witnesses and issue binding recommendations are essential for both justice and future protection. And that is a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. Scan the QR code on your screen to get access to our ILTV app for all of the latest developments coming out of Israel and the broader region. I am Devo Klein, and thank you so much for watching.
Step into the story of Israel's heartland with Blessed by Israel, where every purchase connects you to the land, the people, and the promise. Taste the sweetness of the promised land in their delicious honeys, or wear the story of the land close to your heart with the stunning Special Places of the Land necklace. Behind each product is a family, pioneers living in Judea and Samaria, crafting beauty and goodness from the soil of the Bible. When you buy their creations, you're not only receiving something extraordinary, you're investing in Israel's future, helping small businesses thrive and communities grow strong. Join a movement that celebrates faith, resilience, and hope. Visit blessedbyisrael.com and use ILTV's special code BLESSISRAEL, that's BLESSISRAEL, at checkout for 10% off on your first order. Be part of strengthening Israel, one purchase at a time.
Welcome to Insider. I'm your host, Mayan Hoffman. This week, one dramatic operation in Venezuela may have sent shockwaves far beyond Caracas, from Tehran to Jerusalem to Washington. Assumptions are shifting fast. What does it mean for Iran's protests, Israel's next move, and Trump's global strategy? I'm joined by Ruthie Bloom and Dan Perry for a sharp, no-holds-barred conversation about power, timing, and what comes next. Ruthie, I'm going to start with you. Venezuela felt like a literal lightning strike. It just happened overnight. Did Trump just redraw the rules of what is possible globally?
Well, yes and no. I think he's been doing that all along, to the extent that he threatens, and then everyone says, well, it could be an empty threat. Or what. He's been threatening Maduro. He's been bombing the drug traffickers, and he warned him, and he said, you can do it the easy way or the hard way, like he said to Hamas. He said to Maduro, you can step down because you're not the legitimate ruler, or we're going to take care of you. And then he made good on that vow. So he's not exactly changed. It was a shock to the whole world, of course, because nobody believed that he would do that. Certainly not that he would capture Maduro and his wife, bring them to New York for trial. That was a big shock. But I think it was a message. It wasn't just a message to China and Iran and all the, the axis of evil. It was also, in my opinion, a message to the part of the Republican Party that is trying to pull him away from interventionism in the world. And I think that was a clear message to the Tucker Carlsons of his party as well.
Dan, do you agree? And can you also hone in a little bit on the question of Iran? And was Venezuela a message to Iran as well? But respond to Ruthie first.
You know, Ruthie and I may struggle to disagree on this issue and give you good television. But maybe here's the daylight between us. I have difficulty conceiving of Trump, whose public appearances are frequently incoherent and very often full of nonsense, and whose philosophy about the world is very inconsistent, as having a message for anyone. I think he acts based on some notion of what is in his political interest, of what makes him look like a winner. I have difficulty buying motives that are pure and ideological. And when it comes to regime change, Trump has been all over the map. I mean, his original posture was that the U.S. was wrong in getting involved in forever wars in other people's countries with other people's interests. Indeed, just last month, his national security strategy openly disdained the idea of promoting democracy, correctly noting that in some cases it was attempted as an imposition on societies that maybe weren't ready for it in various ways. So the idea that he's trying to impose democracy on another country strikes me as fantastical. On the other hand, sure, regime change had been attempted in the past by the U.S. and other countries, but it had bemoaned then. I, in recent years, have criticized the Biden administration, before that Obama, for being so weak on the global stage, which left a vacuum that was filled by jihadists and bad faith players of every kind, from dictatorships in the Arab world and elsewhere to Putin, and we see the result, and it might embolden China. So it would be hypocritical of me to criticize this action. The problem lies elsewhere, in the fact that after the rather impressive lightning strike that abducted Maduro, ridiculous and kind of comic as that may be, we see two problems. One is that they haven't really changed the regime. It looks like Trump is inclined to maintain the Chavista regime and do deals with them. And the second is, if you're going to be basically interfering in other countries' affairs with very dubious legality, and we can get into the arguments, but trust me, the bottom line is it's dubious in terms of legality. You don't want to appear like a usurper hours later on international television saying we need access to their oil. That was ugly and very, very foolish. So as for Iran, sure. If I was the Iranian regime right now, I'd be thinking, well, maybe with, success comes more appetite, and they might be emboldened to actually interfere. And the real message, and I can get into this later, is vis-a-vis the Iranian army. The Iranian army is a very important player here. Can I spend a second on that?
Spend 1 minute, but I want to give Ruthie.
The Iranian army is not really part of the theocratic regime. They're very different from the Revolutionary Guards, and they played a very pivotal role in 1979 when, indeed, the Shah was drummed out of Iran, but there was not clarity about what would happen. A month or two later, Ayatollah Khomeini returns from France, and within months, they set up a referendum on whether the Iranian people want a theocracy, and it was completely faked. And 99% supposedly voted in favor, and the catastrophic result lies before us in ruins. The army enabled that because they were timid. I have no doubt the army regrets having allowed that to happen. Now, many revolutions that we consider to be revolutions were actually in a one way or another military coups. I've seen that personally in Romania in 1989 and in Egypt in 2011. Usually, in reality, it's the army betraying the dictator. In theory, that could happen in Iran as well, and Trump's actions and statements may give them something to think about.
For sure. Now, I want to go back, though, to Trump's actions, because in some sense he opened a Pandora's box. You know, you talked about it. It was this sweeping move. He brings the president over to the United States. Now he has to meet these expectations. He needs to get access potentially to that oil. He needs to hopefully have regime change in Venezuela and actually have this impact the rest of the world. Can he stand up to it, or is this actually a little bit dangerous to kind of open this can of worms but not be able to actually carry through?
Well, of course it's dangerous, but here's what I think. I think that, you mentioned the jihadists, Dan. It's interesting because Latin America is not jihadist, but has housed Hezbollah and terrorists, paid for them and housed them. But their culture, Latin American culture, is different from radical Islamist culture, all right? So, and that's crucial here. Because aside from whether the regime is still the Chavist regime, and that's true, I mean, that's what happened with the Soviet Union. It fell, but then you have Putin, who's actually left over from Soviet Russia.
And a big nostalgist.
Right, exactly. And that is a problem. But what is important here, in my opinion, is his attack on Hezbollah, on the drug trafficking, on the terrorists. That is what ties in to Gaza and Iran and everywhere else. That part of it is very crucial. So that's why I'm optimistic about it. It's a message to them, but not just a message. It actually has weakened them very, very severely. It weakens Iran when Hezbollah is already severely weakened in Lebanon. But what about all the money it gets from Latin America? And when he said to Colombia and Mexico and he said, watch out, because you're next. And Cuba, don't think that you're immune from. And that, to me, is a positive move in relation to jihadism, actually.
Interesting.
I would also say that it's not indefensible when he chooses to retain bits and pieces, the essence of the regime, at least for a while, because that could be framed as the learning of a lesson from what happened in Iraq. In Iraq, we deposed a dictator who probably was the essence of his dictatorship. But we went on to destroy the Ba'ath Party, and that left a vacuum, the result of which was complete incoherent government in Iraq for years, and the rise of al-Qaeda in the country, and eventually the mutation of Islamic State. That is now seen as a mistake. So leaving Chavismo in place, at least for a while, can be seen as a practical concession to reality, the kind of thing that, in fact, perhaps Trump should be applauded for. The real issue here is whether Marco Rubio is playing a significant role, and of course, Trump is making noises like Rubio now runs the country. That's probably unrealistic. And it may be that Rubio himself is driven to an unhealthy degree by his own obsession with Cuba because his parents come from Cuba. But on the other hand, Rubio may be the only standard Republican normal in this administration. he can be trusted in ways that Trump and Pam Bondi and the others just cannot. And maybe Rubio will be the author of a rational transition.
But now, one of the other things that I think was rather surprising was the fact that Israel actually was unaware that this was going to go on. Not that Israel has to be privy to everything the United States is going to do, but it certainly seems to work the other way around. And as we mentioned, there is some impact or some reverberations around the Middle East and some of our allies and enemies who are impacted by this move. So are you surprised that Israel was surprised? And how could Netanyahu have been more prepared for this to happen over the weekend?
I don't believe he was surprised. The same way that I don't believe necessarily the U.S. was surprised by Israel's attack on Qatar. This is public theater. It's in everyone's interest that Trump should, project that he's not in any way the tool of Israel. I strongly suspect that there was at least an indication, but I can't prove it. What I can say is Netanyahu's main interest here is the weakening of Hezbollah and Hamas. And as Ruthie said, the money train that does go through, in some cases, Latin America, and alongside Cuba, Venezuela is, in fact, by any measure, Venezuela is was the main player. They're weakening Hezbollah and global jihadism, implicitly weakens Iran. Venezuela was potentially a part of Iran's sanctions busting. Weakening Iran is an excellent thing for Israel. I would add, weakening the Iranian regime is an excellent thing for the Iranian people. Many Iranians right now are begging Israel to get involved. And there is pressure on both Israel and America to seize the moment because of the riots in Iran post the June humiliation that they suffered could create a real opening.
So, Ruthie, turning to you just for a moment when we talk about the protests in Iran, obviously they're gaining more and more steam day by day. And on the other hand, the Iranian government is kind of crushing them more and more day by day, certainly after the attack that happens in Venezuela. So at what point do we see these protests as actually being strategically significant? As Dan mentioned, during the 12-day war, there was actually a call for Israel to help to bring about regime change. But in fact, Trump put a stop to that and said, no, not now. Is something different today? And do you feel that these protests might have more impact than meets the eye?
Well, what's different is that this time, even though the protesters are being gunned down by the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij militias, the whole structure there is so weakened, and I think that has emboldened the Iranians. One of the things that the Iranian people saw after the 12-day war was that Iran was more of a paper tiger than they had imagined. And years ago, Bernard Lewis, the he was a real expert on Iran and the whole Middle East. He said, you know, if you attack Iran, and even if it's nuclear facilities, if you attack Iran, the Iranian people will rally around the regime. And at that time I said, well, then screw them if they're going to rally around the regime. We have to worry about our interests. Right now, I think they're not rallying around. After the 12-day war, they didn't do that. Because what they saw was, they had assumed, like the rest of us, that, if you attack Iran, you're poking the bear, and we're going to be in big trouble. And what we saw is it didn't happen. That emboldened the Iranian people. But I also want to make one point about Trump and Netanyahu. Trump said at his press conference about Venezuela, he said two things that were interesting. He said he didn't let Congress know because he was afraid of leaks. That's why he said Congress leaks. And that's true. And then he said the operation was supposed to have taken place 4 days earlier, approximately, but it was postponed due to bad weather conditions. Is it interesting in a contrast with President Carter's attempt at rescuing the hostages, yes, where the bad weather conditions were what botched the whole thing. Anyway, he said it should have taken place 4 days earlier. Now, the 4 days earlier were exactly when Netanyahu was at Mar-a-Lago. So my guess is that Netanyahu did know that something was in the works. Exactly. Also, I think, and we have no proof, but I think that it's no accident that it coincided. And also, I think that Trump learned a lot from Israel's type of prowess. It's not that I'm saying that the Israeli army is more mighty than the American army. No, it's not. But there is something about the calculations about how you do a strike. And, you know, he said there were 150 aircraft, whatever. Israel also prepared in that way, in a clever way. And I think that the U.S. Army learned a lot from Israel and maybe was even along the way coordinating it to some extent.
Well, where Israel excels is in covert operations that require cleverness and not necessarily scale.
Right.
America's advantage, of course, is scale. So Israel's actions over the past several years, its successes, really have been victories of that sort. And it shows a kind of daring and cleverness that also, alongside the PR hit that Israel took in the past 2 years, have created a lot of admiration. This type of landscape, where you're talking about covert operations and various little skullduggeries, as opposed to a military invasion, need to be kept secret, need to be kept to a tight circle. Like Ruthia, I'm almost sure that Netanyahu was told about it at Mar-a-Lago, but I can't prove it. But of course, the timing strongly suggests it. And Trump would be right in saying such an action, as opposed to seeking approval for a military invasion, can't be one where you advise Congress in advance. Of course it cannot be. I assure you that Netanyahu did not advise the Knesset about the Beeper operation with Hezbollah.
So let me ask you this. You know, even former Defense Minister Benny Gantz is calling on us to take advantage of this opportunity and to carry out some kind of attack inside Iran or to help with the regime change. Do you think that time is right for an attack? And if we would attack Iran right now, especially the growing ballistic missile arsenal, which we know is actually the greater threat than the nuclear arsenal right now, what would that look like? Would it be done with U.S. collaboration? Do you have a vision for that?
I don't think Israel or even the U.S. should explicitly engineer a regime change. What they should be doing is A, realizing regime change is extremely desirable, B, seeking to seize the moment if indeed the time is right, which it looks like it is, and then doing it in ways that look like, and indeed really are, from the ground up. And you can do that because there is so much real a grievance and dissent in Iran. Or the opposition in Iran, the sentiment towards the opposition is very strong. The support even for the Crown Prince Pahlavi is very, very strong. The military, as I say, is very wobbly, and the Revolutionary Guard probably just wants to preserve their economic interests, which is a case of complete and total corruption. So I would say some combination of working with the factors and strengthening the factors, combined with maybe pinpoint strikes at the right time on symbols of the regime, could really, really go a long way, not only in causing it to crumble and maybe causing Khamenei to seek asylum in Moscow, which would be a wonderful symbolic thing, but also to correct the mistake of June, because in June, the thing you're suggesting should really have been done, and at the very least, After the U.S. joined the assault and put paid to the nuclear program, because it really did, with the airstrikes at the end of the war, the U.S. should have presented Iran with surrender terms, which would have included a complete disavowing of any further meddling in the region with jihadist militias all over the place, undermining these Arab countries. That should have been non-negotiable at that point when the regime was supremely weak and was about to collapse anyway. Instead, Trump, impetuous and impatient and eager to declare victory, walked away from the whole thing. I think if he knows anything, he knows that was a mistake, and this would be a chance to correct it.
Well, and certainly as we're seeing that Iran is already beginning to funnel money back to Hezbollah, back to Hamas, and beefing up its own missiles. We're going to end up where we started if we don't take something now. Ruthie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say that, though, you know, nobody wants us to have to go back to war again and again and again. But here's the thing. If we don't preempt against the ballistic missiles, here's a possible scenario. There are rumors that the Ayatollah Khamenei is about to, or is hedging about whether to escape to Russia. And there are also rumors that Revolutionary Guards are beginning to defect. Now, again, we don't know if these are true. These are rumors, spread also in the Arab media, by the way. Now, if that's true, it's possible that Khamenei would say, you know what, Hail Mary, I'm just on my way to Russia. I'm going to launch ballistic missiles at Israel, or, you know, in other words, or Europe. He could do that one last, that kind of jihad, put on a big show. And so that's why I think it's very important to preempt that, because if we don't, we're going to be back in that same situation where we're always waiting to see whether the enemy really means it. I mean, going back to the conceptia of October 7th, you know, are they really going to do it just because they said so? And Khamenei has been saying so.
Well, I doubt that they're in a position to do this at this point, because their ballistic missile program, alongside their nuclear program, has been pretty well trashed. Of course, it should not be allowed to be rebuilt, obviously.
Well, and we know that it is being rebuilt already. We also know that dual-use materials are working their way into Iran in order to be able to...
We don't think they've reestablished anything like that.
Of course, but we know that they're unraveled.
No, but they do have ballistic missiles that are operational.
They still have some, yes. But Israel knows where they are. Symbolism matters in such cases in history. Just like the last major symbol was Ayatollah Khomeini returning on a plane from France. If Khomeini flees Iran, the chances that regime survives are very, very low, much lower than the chances that Chavismo can survive the abduction of Maduro. Khamenei is such a symbol that, and the regime is so brittle anyway, that his departure would probably mean a very quick military coup and some version of Pahlavi returning or the opposition returning, massive Western influx, helping the country with investments and with intelligence operations. I think that would be the end. So it's not so fast that he's going to do this, but it's possible, and it should be encouraged. So behind the scenes, every maneuver should be done to encourage that one thing to happen, the flight of Khamenei.
Right, to Khamenei to Russia for sure. And we're going to have to wrap up really soon, but I want to think about where we are. We're at a very pivotal moment. We're between, the battle between the axis of good and the axis of evil. We've got Venezuela, we've got Iran, we've got changes happening in the region as we enter, here into the beginning of 2026. Ruthie, to wrap us up, what is it going to look like if, God forbid, we fail for Trump, for Netanyahu, for the Iranian opposition? And in your vision, as we enter, this new month, this new calendar year, what does it look like for each of those if we succeed?
Well, if we succeed, what it looks like is that in the near future, and I don't mean, tomorrow, I mean in the coming years, that there's going to be a whole shift in the global order, and hopefully in a better direction. If we fail, then we'll be back to square one, maybe even worse than square one. And look, as I've always said, the trouble from Israel's point of view is that the Jewish people have always had to live by the sword, and I don't think that's ever going to change. There are breaks, pauses in between the need to fight. Every post-war is a pre-war for the Jewish people, and so that's the pessimistic thing I can say. Optimistically, I think things are moving in a better direction, yes.
And 30 seconds, Dan, do you agree or disagree? Give me that 30-second vision.
It's very difficult to conceive of the likes of Trump and Netanyahu. Trump being a supporter of Putin, essentially, as the good guys on the world stage. But sometimes history works in strange ways. To channel Iran's own rhetoric, Venezuela was the small Satan, then Iran is the big Satan. And if 2026 sees a change in Iran, then maybe we can even hope for a change in Russia, and that is a whole new world. And then even I will say that Trump deserves credit.
Wow, well, a lot of Satans, but hopefully we can move towards something
and then
better.
We'll open champagne in the
That's
studio.
right, and we'll have a l'chaim. So unfortunately, we are out of time tonight, so we'll have to wait for that glass of wine next week. But I really want to thank all of our guests for being here, Dan and Ruthie. If you found this discussion valuable, please check out the ILTV podcast for a further series of in-depth interviews on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Ayan Hoffman. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
When I finish a round of Miluim and go back to civilian life, there's almost like a disconnect. It's like after the first few weeks, it feels very weird. You're looking around and you're like, no one knows that I was on a uniform yesterday. Nobody here knows. I just look like a regular guy. And then after a little while, you become disconnected from being a soldier and you really feel like a civilian. And then it feels very hard to put the uniform back on.
Welcome to The Nosh here on ILTV, and today's amazing guest is the one, the only, Shlomo Lipman, singer extraordinaire. Shlomo, thank you so much for joining me here in studio at ILTV.
Thank you for having me. It's awesome.
Shlomo, you are like the quintessential wedding singer. Whoa. Have you ever seen the movie The Wedding Singer?
I actually have not. I've seen clips on YouTube. I've seen clips on YouTube. I haven't seen the full movie yet.
How can you not? You are the wedding singer.
I know. I have to do my homework.
You got to do your homework. You got to see. Okay, so you got to see the full movie, but the clips that you have seen, and I'm sure you've seen a few that you said, and you lived the life of a wedding singer. Are any of them true? Like, what is it to be a wedding singer, especially here in Israel?
It's unbelievable. It's one of the coolest things about being a singer-songwriter or performer in general in the Jewish world. It doesn't matter how small you are as an artist or how big you get. It's always part of your scene. It's always something that you do. And I think that's something so amazing that even the biggest names are able to do something so amazing, which is to make a bride and groom, a chatan and kala, happy.
At what age were you when you decided that you're going to become a singer? Of course, going into the wedding industry as one of the premier wedding singers, but into the music industry itself. How did you decide? When did you decide? Tell me a little bit about how you got into this entire industry.
So I grew up in a very musical home. My grandmother was like the music teacher in the DC area. My dad played the drums, my mom played the flute. And when I was 3 years old, we went to my grandparents' house, and I was already old enough that I would be able to see TV and understand what that is and want to watch something. My dad was like, what is something I'm able to get my son to watch? They still had cassettes then, before DVDs.
You're aging us. You're aging us.
I'm 28, but I guess, the generations move fast. He bought a few Miami Boys Choir cassettes, and I started watching them, and I became absolutely obsessed. And from when I was 3 years old, that's when I knew, when I grow up, I want to be a singer.
Where did you grow up? You said in the DC area?
Yeah, I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland. We made Aliyah when I was 7 to Beit Shemesh, but like my entire childhood was in DC area.
But you said your family is musical. I thought your father was in politics and did something different.
That's true. I mean,
he's not very musical.
That's very true. He started off playing. He played the drums growing up. And
I had no idea. It's very cool.
Yeah. I'm trying to get him back on the drum set a little bit, but
I'd love to see that.
That would be awesome.
Do any of your other siblings or family members play with you, or
No. My sisters joke that I'm the one that took all the talent. It's really just I had a passion for it when I was a little kid, and I continued to work on it since I was 3 years old up until today.
How is it dealing with families here post October 7th in the wedding industry? What do you see different that you didn't have to think about before?
The biggest difference is just the connection and how meaningful. Every chuppah is so meaningful, but now after October 7th, every chuppah has more and more layers of meaning and emotion. Every single person there knows people that are either unfortunately not with us or fighting on the front lines. Every single chatan has friends that are fighting, or he himself fought. Every single chuppah I do, we do tefillah for the chayalim, which is something that didn't really exist that much before the war. It's unbelievable. The connection of all of Am Yisrael together is the biggest difference I've seen in the wedding industry.
And that connection is only getting stronger. And the connection to you and our homeland, our people, not only you a wedding singer, songwriter, you're actually a hero. Now, I'm not sure if it's Miluim you're in, or you were, or you drafted and stayed on. Talk to me a little bit about it, because I've been following your journey and seeing you, and we're going to talk about your dancing moves in uniform as well. But, your unit, Army service, talk to me about what you're doing and have been doing the past 2 years about.
Yeah, so when I was in active service back in 2017, I was in Golani, Brigade Gdud 51, Golani 51. I was a commander there. Went back to yeshiva. Started my life. I was in Keren B'Yavne.
Okay,
I was part of Hesder. Yeah, part of Hesder, and then got married. Went to Kollel at Leva Torah in Beit Shemesh, and then on October 7th, I was called back up to Miluim together with hundreds of thousands of others as part of a Miluim unit of people that used to be in Golani. We were called right up to the Lebanon border. We were there that night. By October 7th night, we were already stationed on the border, ready to go. Thank God.
So talk to me.
Yeah.
October 7th, and I know you said when your parents met, you were living in Beit Shemesh with your family.
Correct.
You're married now and still live in Beit Shemesh?
Still live in Beit Shemesh, yeah. Married a girl from Beit Shemesh. That's where we're based right now.
Based in Beit Shemesh.
Yeah.
So that night you got the call, the text, whatever it was, you got to go to your unit, and you just went straight up north?
Yeah, that entire day was crazy because I was at Leva Torah, which is a Hesder yeshiva for lone soldiers. I was basically helping soldiers out, guys in active service, the entire morning, running back and forth, making sure that guys had rides to go down south. Guys had to go to Beersheba area. I almost drove down south myself a few times to bring them there. And then they told me to go tell the guys that are still in training that they were being called up. And I realized as a reservist, if guys that are still in training are being called up, my call's going to come any second.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Guys that didn't even
finish
their
training, they said, guys, you're being called up right now.
So did they actually have a unit to go to? Were they part of a unit? How does that operate, with training?
Right. So the way training works is you get drafted into a certain unit, you do your training within that unit, and then once you finish your training, you go and you actually it's called going up to the Gdud. You go up to the actual the actual unit that you were training in. So what they were doing is calling everybody up that was in training to go and basically I don't know exactly what they did that day, but my assumption is that they took over certain checkposts and stuff like that for guys that are in active service, so that they're able to prepare and get ready for war. So the second they called them up, I knew my call's going to come any second. Turned on my phone. Very weird doing that on Shabbat and on Chag, but I realized that's what he had to do. And I saw that my commander said, guys, we're going to be called up any second. Get your stuff ready and be ready to go. I told my wife that it could happen any second. I told her, go to your parents. If I get called up, I'll come and I'll say goodbye. And then she went. I went back to shul, and then I checked my phone. I said, guys, we're being called up. Got onto uniform, drove to their house, knocked on the door, opened the door. She saw me in full uniform, and told her I'm going up to the Lebanon border. Don't know exactly what's going to happen, but this is what we have to do.
So now we have a lot of mutual friends. We know about each other. We've been friendly on social media for a while. But where I've been following you recently in the past almost 2 years is in uniform, in your unit. I guess you have some downtime, or maybe just a little bit of downtime, unless it's on break. But I've been following and seeing you singing and dancing in uniform. And talk to me. What made you do that, and the feedback you're getting from it? Because you became a star, like a rock star in uniform, singing beautiful melodies for people to hear and get inspired from.
The first few days of the war, I was in no mood to sing, no mood to post. I didn't want to post about it. I didn't feel like just picking up my phone and making a story. Hey guys, I'm by the Lebanon border. I didn't feel that was right. I said, this is what we're supposed to do. In 2-3 weeks, when all of this settles down, that's what we were thinking then. Then I'll go back to
2
it.
years
I'll post.
later.
Yeah, right. And we were stationed one day, and the way the war works in general, especially when you're not in combat but on border patrol, which is what we were doing at the start of the war, is you have time where you're actually on guard duty, but you have times that you're off. And there was in between one of my shifts, one of my guys in my unit said, Benjamin Fleischman, he asked me, he's like, Shlomo, why don't you sing a little bit? I was like, dude, I'm not in the mood to sing. Well, we'll sing later. Right now we have something to do. We have to be focused. He's like, no, come on, let's sing. was like, all right, fine. I started singing for them a little bit. And then I realized, I have a wedding band back home, and they're all doing like Corona-styled weddings, tiny little weddings for people that their big weddings got canceled because of the situation. And I was like, they don't even know that I'm up here by the Lebanon border. Why don't I just make a video to send to them to kind of let them know, hey, what's going on? I was sitting down in a trench, and I made this video singing Mehera Mehera, a wedding song, sent it to them. My sound man put it on his story, and someone asked him, send this to me right now. That somehow got everywhere, and that was the start of this crazy, crazy thing that became Shlomo Littman, the singing soldier by the Lebanon border.
And it's just, but it's like been spiraling and spiraling. I'm seeing so many of your videos that have gone viral and shared of you just singing from your neshama, from your heart, from your soul. You're singing up there. You're protecting Israel. You literally are a hero. As you're doing that on the border, what's going through your head? What's going through your mind singing in uniform, inspiring Jews and people around the world?
It is so meaningful to me. I was thinking about it. I was talking with one of my friends a few weeks after this entire thing started, because like the next day, right after that first viral video, we were on the way back from, this is crazy, the situation we were in. They gave us our guns, and we went up to guard duty without even making sure that our scopes and our barrels were aligned. It was just kind of, usually when you get a new gun, the first thing you do is you go to the shooting range, you make sure everything's working, and then you go up. But here there's no time to waste. Go and figure it out on the way. After a few days, it kind of settled. We went, we shot a little bit, made sure everything was working. We're on the way back, and there's a wedding happening in this yeshuv that we were stationed at up north. We're like, a wedding? No one's here. It was a chayal that decided, I am not pushing off my wedding. I was supposed to get married today. I'm going to get married today. We saw what was happening. I said,
so one second,
yeah.
His family's not around.
Family's not around.
The bride is not around. They all came up. How did that happen?
Yeah, they all came up. The bride is there in a bridal gown, and he's in full uniform. And they decided, we are doing this. We're not pushing off our wedding. I told them, I'm a wedding singer. If you would like, I would love to sing for you guys. They said, please, we'd love it. That video has millions of views now, and it was unbelievable for me. I was talking to a friend of mine. I hadn't done anything different up by the front lines. I was the same person. I'd been working on trying to get my name out there, and thank God I had started a career beforehand. But it wasn't nothing different changed, and I thought it was such an amazing thing. Akiva, one of the well-known singer Akiva, he was also called up on October 7th, and I thought to myself, it was almost like God was telling me, Shlomo, I'm keeping you for a rainy day. You're putting in the work now, but there's going to be a time where Am Yisrael is getting, this is at the beginning of the war. The only things on social media were all the horrible videos from what happened on October 7th. And all of a sudden, here's a faceless chayal. It wasn't a well-known name. It was just a chayal singing at a wedding of another chayal. And I think that hits a lot more than if I was a well-known name beforehand. It might have been meaningful and emotional, but the fact that it's just a chayal without a name singing for another chayal, I think that hit so much deeper. And since then, I realized, aside from actually defending Am Yisrael, and afterwards we went into Lebanon and fought there, and in Syria fought there as well, I have another mission, which is to bring hope, to bring happiness, and chizuk to Am Yisrael that needs it so much.
I want to go into in a little bit, what you've saw and what you've seen in Lebanon, Syria, but that's really where I got to know you a lot more and personally, because at that time, or a little after that time, I guess when you had a break from the Army, you came to the United States and you performed in concert in the United States. I know IMC hosted one of the events in Lawrence, New York. Correct. That's where we got to meet each other, and you performed in uniform on stage. You had the whole crowd standing, singing with you. You're now an international sensation going around the world singing. How did you feel going from singing at weddings and locally and with your family and in Beit Shemesh and beyond here in Israel to headlining concerts in the USA and abroad?
It's something I always wanted to do since I was a little kid. That's all. I love being on stage, and there's something very different between performing at a wedding and performing on stage.
I was going to ask you, what's the difference in the mindset with singing at a wedding and on stage? When on stage you have a whole production team and crowd and a lot more going on than at a wedding, when if you're the wedding singer. You're more or less in charge of how the night's going to go.
Correct. It's a very different type of performing. I've happened to I've learned to fall in love with performing at weddings as well, and it's up to the point where even when Be'ezrat Hashem I'm an A-lister, I still want to be doing weddings.
You are an A-lister.
Oh, thank you.
I
appreciate that. But even when I theoretically should stop doing weddings, I want to continue doing it. There's something very special about performing at a wedding and giving over that energy to a chatan and kala. But it's a very different type of performance. It's how you use the stage, how you dance, how you present yourself. But it's something I always wanted to do, and I think it's something so amazing. You know, a lot of times this is a very interesting concept. When I finish a round of miluim and go back to civilian life, there's almost like a disconnect. It's like after the first few weeks, it feels very weird. You're looking around and you're like, no one knows that I was on a uniform yesterday. Nobody here knows. I just look like a regular guy. And then after a little while, you become disconnected from being a soldier and you really feel like a civilian. And then it feels very hard to put the uniform back on. But I've come to learn that Am Yisrael needs it. Am Yisrael really needs it. And there are times that I just want to perform like this. And my production team says, Shlomo, you don't understand. These people, especially outside of Israel, when they see you performing on uniform and in uniform, it's something so needed, that connection, seeing someone on uniform, the energy that you're able to give over and the energy you get back. And that's just how it works. You give over the energy, you get it back, you're able to give more. And that connection between Am Yisrael as a whole and Israel, and especially a soldier, is something so amazing.
But a lot of that is the energy that they're feeling, or the emotions that, the crowd is feeling. That's why you're doing it. But what is going through your mind, your soul, your body, your heart, really, when you're on stage there in your uniform and you're representing Israel, you're singing and representing the Jewish people? What is going through your head when you're on that stage looking at that crowd as they're cheering and standing for you in uniform?
Plain and simple, I feel like I'm doing what I was born to do.
What you were born to do?
100%.
It's insane. And do you get up and say, listen, I need to sing this song on stage, or I gotta, this song is more meaningful, it's gonna touch the people? How do you get your sets in line with what the crowd either are anticipating or what they want?
So this is where the two worlds of concerts and weddings kind of connect and collide. We started doing, my band and I, every wedding now, we have something we call a machozet rabak. It's basically a medley of all the quote-unquote war songs.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but you got to explain it.
The Am Yisrael Chai songs. Am Yisrael Chai, Anachnu Ma'aminim B'nei Ma'aminim, Hashem Yitbarach, Al Tira Yisrael, Am Hanetzach Lo Mefached. And that's a medley that we do as part of our wedding set. And what we've done is basically brought that onto the stage. There are obviously other songs that I do. I do some of my own music. I do covers. But part of a big bulk of what we do as part of our show is we do all of these songs that we sing on the front lines, and growing up we sang, and when I was in active service before we went on long treks or we had training exercises, we sang all these songs. And to see them now on the global stage and all of Am Yisrael kind of feeling what a regular chayal feels before he goes into battle, it's something so unbelievable.
What, at the end of the show, I've seen it myself. I've seen you speak to the crowd, take pictures, shake hands, give hugs. Any special, story or any touching moment that you could share with us that maybe someone in the crowd, or you spend a Shabbat with someone overseas during a concert, has shared with you how you've changed them or brought them something special?
That's a good question.
You had to change so many lives with what you're doing. It's just there's no other way that it can't be possible.
For sure, there's a lot of people that have. I mean, just one example from the beginning of the war. I don't know what ended up happening with this person. This is not from a show, but actually from social media and posting me singing on Madim in uniform. Somebody wrote to me that he's an EMT in New York, and he decided he wants to leave everything there, come here and start working here as an EMT. I don't know if it was in the army or to help out, but someone said, I'm leaving everything behind to go and give in Israel, and you inspired me to do that. That's something that hit me very, very deeply.
You had to inspire many people. But with that being said, I just have to backtrack a little bit and ask, with all the time that you've been spending in Miluim and you having your own business here of wedding singers, or a wedding band. How has it affected you if you weren't able to perform at these weddings? This is your livelihood. This is how you pay your bills, support your family. If you weren't able to do that, how did you survive? How did you keep on going? Or is serving in the army and serving your country that much that you'll give it all up for?
First of all, 100%, I would give it all up for that. That's for sure. And God has a plan. He takes care of everybody. When you do the right thing, then he's going to take care of you 100%, and you're going to get exactly what you're supposed to get in life. I'm very privileged that because I'm a singer, my business isn't going anywhere really. There are people that left employed jobs in businesses and then or people that ran businesses, and then all of a sudden that business is not there, and then they've lost everything and given that up to be in the army. The army does make sure that you're subsidized financially for what you lost while you're away, but there are people that come back to civilian life and then their business is not there.
And they almost have to start from scratch.
Right, have to start from scratch. I'm very privileged that because of the nature of my work, people are always going to be getting married, especially now that I've become this singing soldier. People are still following. They know what's going on with me, and they know, oh, he's going to be back in civilian life. And so I've been very privileged. That hasn't really affected me, but there are definitely people that give it all up to make sure that they're able to watch over the Jewish world.
When you are back in reserve duty, in Miluim, do you feel now that it's almost a mission that you have to put out some songs in uniform, you have to get out and on stage and sing for them? Like this is what people are wanting, but not only wanting, but it gives them, the chizuk to support and keep going?
There are times that it feels like I have to force to do it, because for me, at the beginning of the war, I really needed it as well. I needed to sing for people. I felt like I needed to express what I'm feeling inside and give over to the Jewish world and to the world in general. And as the time has gone on and the war has gone on, I felt that personally a little bit less. But every time I do post, I see how much other people, the world outside, people that are away from the army, because I feel it, right? You're in uniform, you're going into Lebanon, fighting there, you're going into Syria or on the border. I feel it. I'm very connected, but I feel like sometimes it's almost harder for the people not on the front lines. Sometimes we think our Chaylim have it. It's really the hardest for the families. First of all, I have a wife, I have 2 kids at home. I'm with my guys on the front lines, and I'm actively doing the work, and I feel a lot of, first of all, I feel connected, and I feel the meaning behind what I'm doing. But the families and Am Yisrael as a whole, people that are not on the front lines, I feel like they need it even way more. They need the chizuk, they need the strength a lot more than our soldiers on the front lines. So every time I push myself to, no, Am Yisrael needs this, and I get my guitar or wherever I am and I make a video to kind of bring chizuk. It's never been about how can I use this to my advantage. Since the very beginning of the war, I didn't want to post at the beginning of the war. It just happened, right? It happened, and I realized I'm just giving over to people that need it. It's not about me. It's amazing. Hashem has his ways, and I've obviously gained.
It might not be about you, but let's make something
sure.
about you. If someone wants to contact you and hire you because they're hearing your amazing story and everything else, how can they find you?
So you can find me on Instagram, Shlomo Lippman Music. That's my Instagram. If you want to find me.
That's what I follow, so I know where it is.
If you want to follow my Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, it's all Shlomo Lippman. And hey, if you have an event happening or if you have a show anywhere in the world, I want to connect with Am Yisrael. That's my mission, and I can't wait to celebrate with you.
Now that it is your mission, and you had many missions, I don't know what you can and can't talk about, but you are a soldier, a hero of the Jewish nation. You served, as you said, up on the border with Lebanon. You said Syria. I don't know how much you went into Syria, and if you knocked on a door in Damascus and said, "Hey, I'm here." But can you share some stories or anything about your service up north, what you did, and what your feelings were as you're protecting Israel and the Jewish people around the world?
100%. I'll share 2 stories that are unbelievable. The first one was, so we were first stationed by the Lebanon border, then we were stationed by the Syrian border, and then we ended up going into Lebanon and into Syria. I was stationed by the Syrian border during the first Iranian attack, and they told us, guys, phones aside, all right, listen, tonight there's a 99% chance that Iran is going to attack. Just so you know, a large member of the personnel up north are being moved down south, not because they need them down south, but because they don't want to have mass casualties. But you guys are here, so good luck. Okay, I was part of a force called Carmel Aleph, and anytime anything happens in our area, we drive right away to one of the many routes that go from deep into Syria into Israel to block off that route. And I was on the top of a mountain, on top of a little hill, when the first Iranian attack happened. It all happened right above my head. And really, that was the first time that I felt, sometimes we feel like we're part of the equation, right? I have a gun, there's a terrorist near me. I can, if I practice a lot beforehand and I'm quick, I can eliminate him before he gets to me. But here, it doesn't matter how much I shoot a ballistic missile, I'm not part of this equation at all. And I literally just started singing Vihisha Amd up there because I realized in the end of the day, it's all in God's hands. And we're just here to try to, do our part, but it's all in his hands. That's the first story. Second thing is we went into Lebanon after a year of preparing, and we talked about this while we were by the border. It's how is the state of Israel going to handle going into Lebanon? They always told us from the very beginning of my training back in 2017, Hamas is child's play compared to Hezbollah. And that was before they had years of training in the civil war in Syria. These are trained fighters. This is going to be a crazy, crazy war. How is Israel going to be able to deal with that? Nasrallah gets killed, and we go into Lebanon, and they all ran away. We went into places that were supposed to be swarming with terrorists. We found crazy, crazy amounts of ammunition that one of my senior commanders says he thinks that if they would have infiltrated from the north, from Metula, where we ended up going in, we would have had to fight them off in Tel Aviv area. That's how crazy this was. We found go bags ready to go, motorcycles. Just give us the word. And they were going to infiltrate Israel. And we found all these, and these terrorists ran away. We went into the places that were supposed to be the most dangerous places and basically took it over without a fight. Unbelievable. The miracles that we saw in Lebanon, unbelievable.
And the crazy part is we unfortunately know a lot of stories from the First and Second Lebanon War, and it was nothing like what you experienced. Thank God you experienced what you had, and not,
correct. Right.
Previously unfortunately what many have experienced. But for you to say that, but to see what was being planned and what they had, you had to be like, this could have been insane, and it is insane finding it afterwards, but it could have gone much worse.
It was unimaginable. It was unbelievable. We're looking around, we're like, this is crazy. There was a Shabbat afternoon that we were in Lebanon when they were bringing in people from Handasa to tear down houses. Bringing in bulldozers and the such, and we're just like chilling around. We're there to make sure that we watch over them. No one comes near, and we're just like chilling there on a Shabbat, and we're like, we're in Lebanon right now, just like hanging out on Shabbat afternoon. What? How is that? Like we all pictured what it's going to look like when we go into Lebanon and have to fight, and we're like, this is crazy. It's unbelievable. This is nothing like what we thought it was going to be, and it's all just, to me, open miracles.
It is all unbelievable and crazy. But when you say picture, you were born in America. You grew up for a short period of life in America before your family moved and made Aliyah to Israel. You wear the uniform. You protect Israel. I personally think you protect the Jewish people around the world. How do you see yourself? How do you picture yourself from someone who was brought up in America, moved to Israel, and now part of the greatest army our nation has ever had? How does that make you feel? And how do you see yourself?
Incredibly privileged. Incredibly privileged. I could have very easily just been a regular kid growing up in the States, staying in the States. I played baseball. I played in the Israel national team. I sing, obviously. I could have made a career there. I'm always very thankful to my parents that they made Aliyah back when I was 7, because I don't know what would happen, if I stayed there for longer. I feel incredibly privileged. It is a gift. It's a mission. It's something that I wouldn't give away for the world. I'm so thankful that I get to be part of God's army.
Now, as thankful as you are, have you, in any of your travels, have you ever experienced the opposite side, any anti-Semitism or anti-Israel rhetoric?
Not really. I really haven't. I mean, I've obviously experienced it online like everybody else, but in person, not really. I've really just seen so much love, so much support. The Jewish people, the Jewish community around the world are amazing. And I think that throughout this war, the IDF went from being the Israeli army to the Jewish army.
And what's up next for Shlomo Lippman? Where are you going next? What are you doing? What's in the pipeline?
All right, so right now I am releasing singles from my upcoming album, my debut album. As of now, I'm really focused on weddings here in Israel and shows abroad. I'm going to be back in the States, Hanukkah time, Be'ezrat Hashem, for another tour. We just got back from a tour in New York during August. And the second that the album is out, when the album will be out, I do not know, because every time I think I know what's going to be out, I get called for another round of Miluim, which is totally fine. It's going to be out when it's out. My goal is to make sure that it is the highest level music and that I put it together properly for the people that are going to end up listening to it. The second that it's out, I'm going to go on a tour both here in Israel and around the world.
Just a 10-second message. You as a soldier protecting, once again, Israel and everything else. What do you, because you are from America and have family, I'm sure, still in America, what is one message you have to the people in America and around the world watching Israel, watching the IDF in today's day and age?
You always have a home here in Israel. No matter what's going on around the world, we are always here to welcome you with open arms. This is your home at the end of the day. This is the home of the Jewish people. It's the future of the Jewish people. Just know that all the Chayalim, all the people in Israel, we are waiting to accept you with open arms whenever you so choose. And if you come to visit or you want to make your life here, we want to be part of that together with you. And my message for everyone around the world is that it's going to be good. Sometimes it feels like, what is going on? You know, my new single that just came out, Kama Tov, it's all about that. I wrote that by the Syrian border when that attack happened, that Iranian attack. Kama Tov olech liot po. First of all, it is so good already. We believe that God is good. It's always great. We just don't always see it. And we're going to see it really soon. It's going to be so good.
Come see in Israel. Shlomo Lippman, I want to thank you so much for joining me here.
Thank you for having me
today. You are very inspirational, besides a great singer, but very, very inspirational. Keep doing good. Your family should be very, very proud of you. All of Israel, the Jewish nation, the world is very, very proud of you. I want to thank everyone for tuning in for another amazing episode of The Nosh, exclusively on ILTV. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Back to ILTV on the hour. I am Devo Klein, coming to you live from Israel with all of the top stories of Israel and the region. A new report by Kan News claims that last night Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told ministers in his cabinet that Washington has given Jerusalem the green light to renew an offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The report does not cite any sources, but does say that both Israel and Washington are dissatisfied with the Lebanese government's efforts to curb Hezbollah's power. This report comes amid continued Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon on the terror group's positions, with the latest airstrike targeting a member of Hezbollah's aerial unit. He was tasked with re-establishing Hezbollah's aerial arsenal. With Hezbollah's continuous attempts to rebuild and rearm on Israel's border in violation of the 2024 ceasefire agreement, paired with the Lebanese failure to control the terror group, speculation grows that an Israeli assault on Hezbollah is imminent and could occur at any point. And on the Gaza front, this morning, the IDF identified a projectile being fired from Gaza City. The failed projectile was aimed at Israeli communities in southern Israel, but did not cross the border line. Instead, the projectile fell short in an open area near a hospital in northern Gaza, shortly after the IDF struck the position from which the projectile was fired. This strike follows a string of targeted strikes on senior terrorists across the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, the United States is still pushing for Phase 2 of the Gaza deal. A worrying report from Axios claims that Washington plans to begin Phase 2 of the agreement before Hamas is disarmed and before the body of the final Israeli hostage is returned. The Red Cross and Hamas have yesterday renewed search and rescue efforts to locate the body of Master Sergeant Ran Gvili, with today marking day 825 of his captivity. There is daylight between Washington and Jerusalem, as reports indicate that the Trump administration has made clear to Netanyahu that it remains committed to both goals, disarming Hamas and bringing home the remains of Gvili, but at the same time is not prepared to condition the start of Phase 2 on either. And according to Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israel's Negev region is out of control. Crime and gang violence has spiked dramatically in the Negev region, and national efforts are ongoing to restore law and order. When touring the region with Defense Minister Katz and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu described the region as a merging front of criminal and security threats, including tens of thousands of illegal weapons confiscated. The ministers and Netanyahu discussed a comprehensive 5-year plan to combat the rising crime rates. Have a listen.
אנחנו באים להחזיר את הנגב למדינת ישראל. זה אומר התיישבות בקנה מידה שלא הכרנו. זה אומר הסדרה גם לתושבים הבדואים, אבל זה אומר בראש ובראשונה החזרת חוק וסדר. הנגב משתולל. אנחנו נרסן אותו, והתחילה פעולה חשובה של משטרת ישראל בשילוב כוחות אחרים. כדי לרסן אותו אנחנו צריכים להבין שהאיום הפלילי והאיום הביטחוני מתמזגים זה בזה, עם רבבות כלי נשק, עם רחפנים שחוצים גבולות ועם איומים אחרים. לכן אנחנו נביא פרויקט לאומי להשגת כל המטרות האלה, אבל בראש ובראשונה להחזיר את המשילות לנגב.
And Australia has announced they will launch a federal royal commission into the Bondi Beach terror massacre after weeks of pressure from the Jewish community and the victims' families. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced the inquiry to be led by former High Court Justice Virginia Bell, who will examine both the ISIS-inspired attack that killed 15 people during a Hanukkah celebration and the broader rise of anti-Semitism and extremism in Australia. Jewish leaders are welcoming the move as a long overdue step toward accountability, saying the commission's powers to summon witnesses and issue binding recommendations are essential for both justice and future protection. And that is a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. Scan the QR code on your screen to get access to our ILTV app for all of the latest developments coming out of Israel and the broader region. I am Devo Klein, and thank you so much for watching.
The Trump administration did something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. One thing we do know for sure, the only entity that is more terrified than Maduro right now is the Islamic regime in Iran. What makes things different this time? The regime's stability is at a historic low. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Off the Record. In a time when rage bait and headlines travel faster than truth, this show exists to pause, question, and cut through the noise. We believe in having difficult conversations without losing our sanity and humanity. I'm Zina Rachamilova, and thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been quite a week, hasn't it? Since the last episode that we filmed, so much has happened across the globe. In just 1 week, we began with protests erupting all over Iran, the largest protest since the Women Life Freedom movement after the murder of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. And then, before the week was over, the Trump administration did something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. They struck Venezuela and captured the narco dictator Nicolas Maduro and his wife. The U.S. brought both of them to New York City, and the two will be held in the Brooklyn Detention Center until further notice. We'll be unpacking all of this today on Off the Record. Let's get into it. We know that the people of Iran have been at the mercy of this brutal dictatorship since 1979. The Islamic Republic of Iran is an authoritarian regime that survives through repression, fear, and violence against its own people. It jails, tortures, and executes dissidents, crushes women's rights, censors the press, and violently suppresses protests. Iranians face poverty and isolation while the regime funnels money into terrorism and proxy wars across the Middle East. This regime has no democratic legitimacy, no accountability, and no tolerance for freedom. Now, these demonstrations begun in Tehran and they spread across the country in the backdrop of the economy. Iran's currency has plummeted and become completely worthless. Right now, one Iranian rial is worth 0.00024 US dollars. There's actually a video circulating on Iranian social media showing that it requires an entire table of banknotes equaling to hundreds of millions of rial just to buy one mobile phone. That's how bad the economic crisis is in Iran. What's meaningful about these protests is that the Bazari class, the class of merchants that were essential in the revolution in 1979, some of them joined these protests. During the revolution, the Bazaris were crucial in mobilizing grassroots support and providing funding, shelter, and organizational networks for demonstrations against the Shah. And now, we're seeing videos coming from the Grand Bazaar in Tehran showing that these stores are closed, and even stores that are open, which are probably regime loyalists, are forced to close because of these demonstrations. But what's really interesting is that despite media narratives framing these protests as a response to inflation or economic hardship, that is not what Iranians on the streets are demanding. If you listen to the slogans made in these demonstrations, you aren't hearing complaints about the economy or the cost of living. You are hearing Iranians chant against the Islamic Republic itself that has oppressed them for 47 years. You hear slogans like, "Until the mullahs are dead, we won't be free," or "Death to the dictator." They're also demanding that the regime stop supporting terror, namely Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is what they're chanting, and this is what should be the focus when we talk about these protests, not framing it as if it's economic grievances. No, they are fighting for their freedom. Some people may say, this isn't the first time Iranians have risked their lives on the streets, so what's really going to change now? Well, what's meaningful and unique about this round of protests is that they're happening in the backdrop of the Iranian war with Israel. Israel demonstrated how weak the Iranian regime actually was after the 12-day war in June, and Israel's decisive victory gave the people of Iran greater confidence that the regime isn't an impenetrable force. So, for the first time during these protests, the regime is clearly worried, so much so that Israel even thought it would launch an attack out of desperation to deflect on what's actually happening on their streets. So, what makes things different this time? The regime's stability is at a historic low. Now, for weeks before these protests, Israel was deeply concerned about Iran launching a strike after monitoring their missile drills. We all knew that the regime's nuclear threat posed an existential danger to Israel, especially since it was something that Netanyahu has warned us about for years. But now, after the war, Iran's ballistic missile program is seen as an equally grave existential threat. If Israel and the U.S. don't have enough interceptors to stop the missiles from landing at Israeli communities, the damage would equal to that of a nuclear strike. Does this mean that Israel may potentially go to war with Iran? It's hard to say. Dynamics in the Middle East can shift within minutes, and given what happened in Venezuela, which we'll cover shortly, the regime is on its knees. I think Trump has sent a very powerful message against everyone in the so-called axis of resistance this weekend. Israel, therefore, has even more incentive to stop Iran in its tracks and prevent an attack. Now, during the Mar-a-Lago summit, President Trump said he would support an Israeli attack against the regime's ballistic missile program. And this is a pretty big deal because we know that Iran, while pausing its efforts to create a nuclear program, has actually accelerated its efforts to rebuild its ballistic missile program in the last 6 months. It has purchased thousands of ballistic missiles from China and is trying to recover many of the military bases that deal with it. So when President Trump makes it clear that there's no daylight between the U.S. and Israel when it comes to handling this regime, it sends a powerful message to the supreme leader. What I want to bring the focus back to is the people of Iran. The people on the streets protesting now are some of the bravest people I think I've ever seen. Quite frankly, I think all of us who have grown up in Western democracies lack an appreciation for what Iranians are fighting for on the streets. We can't really appreciate what it means to safely participate in a protest without risking your life or your family's life. Under the Islamic regime, if your face is photographed or if authorities get wind of your involvement, you could face an unfair trial and even be sentenced to death. Your family, your kids can all be taken away from you in an instant. So for all of us sitting in democracies, wherever we are, we should be grateful, we should be inspired by Iranians, and we should all be speaking up for them. The fact that Israeli leaders sent a message of solidarity to the people of Iran at the beginning of these protests was amazing, and the fact that Mossad had published a post on X telling Iranians, "We are in the field with you," is so important and meaningful because it lets Iranians know that they are not alone and that Mossad is on the ground working to try to help these protesters. Iranians on the streets need support, but at a minimum, they need leaders around the world to just publicly declare solidarity with them. They need America and the entire West to make it clear that they stand shoulder to shoulder with the people and continue to bring attention to the protest movement internationally. This is why Donald Trump's post on Truth Social said that the United States will come to the rescue of the Iranian people. This is what Western leaders should be doing, and public statements like this are not enough. Western leaders should be giving these protesters practical, logistical, and cyber support, providing internet access to help Iranians stay online when the regime shuts it down, providing secure communication tools to evade surveillance, protecting activists from cyber attacks and digital tracking. They should be providing real-time intelligence to protesters. They should be amplifying dissidents instead of regime propaganda. This kind of assistance does not choose Iran's future for its people. It gives them the tools to choose it themselves. If democracies claim to stand for freedom, dignity, and sovereignty, then helping peaceful protesters survive against an authoritarian regime is what is needed. This is not about foreign policy or intervention. It's about solidarity with a population whose basic rights are being systematically denied. When a regime survives by censoring the internet, jailing dissenters, and killing unarmed civilians, helping the people communicate and organize and protect themselves is an extension of democratic values. So with that, let us tell the people of Iran that we in Israel stand shoulder to shoulder with you, and we will be the ones speaking up for you when the regime attempts to silence you. Now, let's talk about Venezuela. On Saturday, January 3rd, the U.S. struck the Venezuelan capital city of Caracas and then announced that President Nicolas Maduro, along with his wife, have been captured and transported out of the country. The operation happened overnight, and from what we understand, it happened so quickly that Maduro was not even able to reach his safe room in time. He will be arraigned in federal court in the coming days for drug offenses and other crimes committed against the U.S. Maduro's wife and his sons have also been indicted. Trump later shared a photo of Maduro on a U.S. naval ship heading to New York, where the dictator and his wife will be held in a detention center charged with weapon and drug offenses. Now, there's a lot to unpack about Venezuela, and I've already seen a lot of people explaining the history of the country and the way in which Hugo Chavez ruined the country and how Nicolas Maduro made it a lot worse. One of the richest countries in South America became one of the poorest under these two, and essentially turned Venezuela into a failed state. Between the Chavez regime and the Maduro regime, they've destroyed the economy, there's no foreign investment, and the country has faced international sanctions. About 8 million Venezuelans fled the country because of these two. That is 1/4 of the population. Can you imagine what 1/4 of your country having to leave looks like because things have gotten so bad? Venezuelans fled to Colombia, many across Latin America, and many to the United States. The Maduro regime destroyed the economy and made it essentially impossible to live in Venezuela. So I encourage everyone interested to take a look into the history in detail, and more specifically, to speak to Venezuelans who've lived through it all, and not to privileged Americans who have no idea what they're talking about. But what I do want to discuss here is what comes next. What does this mean for Israel, America, and the world, frankly? There have been a number of reasons laid out by Trump as to why this operation was necessary. One is drugs. Another is oil. It is believed that Venezuela has the largest reserves of oil in the world. Another reason is the allegation that Maduro has been releasing some of his criminals and gangs into the U.S. We know the CIA has been on the ground in Venezuela for months now, and clearly there wasn't much of a fight. The U.S. went in strategically, taking out power, taking out key facilities, and ultimately they were able to arrest Maduro. There had been conversations for weeks about a negotiated exit for the dictator, but as the Secretary of State Marco Rubio said at the press conference, Maduro kept playing games. He tried to posture, tried to assert authority he didn't really have. Eventually, the U.S. lost its patience. Now, here's a more detailed timeline. In 2020, the U.S. charged Maduro and 14 members of his inner circle with narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, money laundering, and corruption. It offered a $15 million reward for information leading to Maduro's arrest. In 2024, Maduro was declared the winner of the presidential election, even though voting tallies collected showed that the opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, won by a landslide. The countries that recognized Maduro's so-called victory in 2024 included Cuba, China, Russia, North Korea, and the Islamic Republic of Iran and Assad's Syria. These were the types of governments that were willing to legitimize Maduro's election. And it was very clear to the international community, and especially clear to the Venezuelan people, that Maduro did not win that election. Because of that, Maduro has long been viewed internationally as the illegitimate leader of Venezuela. Now in 2025, the U.S. increased its reward for information leading to Maduro's arrest to $25 million. This reward then doubled in August of 2025 to $15 million. If you watch the press conference with Trump, Hegseth, and Rubio, they reiterated there has been indictment on Maduro for a while. In fact, Rubio made the joke that America just saved itself $15 million when they arrested Maduro themselves. In September of 2025, the U.S. launches strikes on what it says were drug smuggling boats targeting vessels in the Pacific and the Caribbean. Between September and December, more than 100 people were killed in the strikes. October 2025, Trump authorizes the CIA to conduct covert operations inside of Venezuela. Maduro addresses the people of the United States in a television address saying, "No war, yes peace." All of this led up to what happened over the weekend and led to Trump's announcement that the U.S. will be temporarily running Venezuela. I still have no idea what that means. He might be serious, or this might be another ploy by Trump to say things like he did about the Gaza Riviera, maybe as a political tactic to make his enemies do what he wants them to do, but we have yet to see how this pans out. I also want to mention that some commentators who are happy about Maduro's arrest are also saying that they're worried in the way that it was done because they feel that Trump's aim here is oil in Venezuela, which he talked about several times in the press conference, more than he talked about the stability and future of Venezuela. Now, has the U.S. violated international law? There are arguments that are saying both things. Is there precedent for something like this? Yes. Only time will tell what will actually happen next. Remember, it's only the beginning of the week, so who knows where we'll be by the end of it. And if there's anyone whose actions we can never predict, it's U.S. President Donald Trump's. One thing we do know for sure is that the only entity that is more terrified than Maduro right now is the Islamic regime in Iran. Venezuela under Maduro has become a hub for America's adversaries, including the regime, which used the country to evade U.S. sanctions, move oil, fuel, and weapons. Several years ago, the Iranian regime concluded a major 20-year cooperation treaty with Venezuela. One of its many provisions was secretly transferring 1 million hectares of Venezuelan farmland to Iranian control. The regime's proxy, Hezbollah, runs military training centers in restricted sections of Venezuela. The alliance with the Maduro regime provides Tehran with opportunities to target U.S. interests and spread its influence across Latin America. Then there's Russia, which relied on Venezuela as a strategic partner near the United States with military, intelligence, and diplomatic access in Latin America. China risked billions in loans, infrastructure investments, and long-term influence for Venezuela. Outing Maduro disrupts this entire network, the entire axis of resistance. With the U.S. military presence surrounding Venezuela, the collapse of the Maduro regime could weaken the broader authoritarian network that challenged the U.S. Whatever your thoughts are, the stakes go way beyond Venezuela itself. Under Maduro, the country fueled mass poverty and forced migration, transnational crime and drug trafficking, and it allowed foreign adversaries to operate dangerously close to the U.S. Maduro's fall could reshape security across Latin America and set the tone for how authoritarian systems are confronted in the future. The big picture? This isn't just a Venezuelan story. It's a test case for the entire region. What comes next will determine whether that side of the hemisphere becomes safer or far more fragile. As we watch these events unfold, from Jerusalem to Tehran to Washington and Caracas, let us remember that we must be responsible and accountable for how we talk about what happens next. These actions affect all of us, and so I thank you for joining me and having another deep discussion on Off the Record. We'll see you again next time.
And moving on, hundreds of Jews from across Israel and North America closed out 2025 not with speeches, but with action. Running, rolling, and walking together in the Negev. They took part in Adi's 4th annual Race for Inclusion, a powerful celebration of ability, healing, and hope.
Wow, what a fun day today. Here at Adi Negev Nahalat Eiran, we just completed 2.5 kilometers of the Race for Inclusion, a race that brings together people from all different abilities to celebrate Jewish unity and strength. More than 400 high school, gap year, and college students from North America gathered at Adi Negev Nahalat Eiran last week to take part in the 4th annual Race for Inclusion, a 2.5-kilometer fun run through the 40-acre rehabilitation village. Participants came through programs including Jewish National Fund USA's Alternative Winter Break and the Alexander Muss High School in Israel. They were joined by rehabilitating IDF soldiers, members of Adi's wheelchair basketball team, staff, volunteers, and residents crossing the finish line side by side. At the start of the race, Adi's Director of Advancement, Ellie Klein, reminded participants that this run carries a deeper meaning.
There are so many people of your age, college campuses across America, communities around the world who are running, do evil things, to promote hatred, promote division. But you decided to be here today at Adi Negev Nahalat Eiran to promote love and inclusion.
For Klein, the symbolism of running here is impossible to separate from the events of October 7th, 2023, when terrorists passed just outside the village on their way to Ofakim.
They want to advance hope, they want to advance healing, and they want to allow us to focus, to highlight on our humanity.
Adi Negev serves people of every background and ability, from residents with severe disabilities to war-wounded soldiers and civilians receiving treatment at the Kaylee Rehabilitation Medical Center, the first and only fully dedicated rehabilitation hospital in southern Israel.
We have so many different types of people who are coming here, all levels of ability. We have Jews, Israeli Arabs, Bedouins, Druze. The bottom line is that when they come here, they just focus on their humanity. All the stuff that we love to argue about, our politics, our religion, our background, we leave it at the door.
For the young participants, the experience was personal and eye-opening.
There were so many supportive, happy people there when you ran past the finish line.
I really believe in helping out this community of special needs and people with all different disabilities, so I want to be here and show my support for them.
As music played and a dance party broke out at the finish line, the message was clear: everyone belongs.
I think being able to do something that so many people with disabilities normally wouldn't be able to do, like running, is so incredible because, we're making it so that everyone can do it.
And for many, that joy said everything.
How was it? Wow, that was wonderful, so great. We're here to do the breaks like this. Wow, we don't say walks in the road. That was so fun, so fun.
We will continue to preempt. We will continue to prevent Hezbollah from being able again to accumulate 150,000 projectiles to send against Israel. We will prevent Hamas from being strong enough so that it can prepare a war against Israel.
So
we will try to prevent Iran from having thousands of ballistic missiles produced every month so that they can attack Israel on a massive scale.
Hello and welcome back to the ILTV podcast. I'm Ayan Hoffman, executive editor of ILTV, and we are so happy to have back our viewers and our listeners. Now today we're joined by Dr. Dan Shiftan, head of the International Graduate Program in National Security Studies at the University of Haifa. Dr. Shiftan is a globally renowned national security expert, consultant, author, and commentator who for decades has advised top leaders around the world. He's known for cutting through the noise to the strategic bottom line. 2 years after October 7th, Israel is living in a new reality, militarily, diplomatically, and, of course, internally. So we're very lucky to be able to learn from Dr. Shiftan today. Welcome.
Good morning.
Great to have you here. Now, I do want to jump into all of the things that I mentioned, but first I would need to start with what is going on the 8th front, the global front of anti-Semitism, which of course led to the terrible, violent attack that we saw in Australia so recently. Dr. Shiftan, why is Israel losing this battle in the international arena? And do you expect more mass casualty events or other episodes to occur before we get it under control?
Anti-Semitism has always been with us and will be with us for a very long time. Perhaps we underestimated how potent it is and how wide the support for anti-Semitism is. But the reason for the criticism of Israel and the hate of Israel is not always, or not even very often, anti-Semitism. It is something deeper. Israel is in a unique situation. You've never had a civilized, open society confronted for generations with existential threats. And in order to survive in a very violent region, Israel must take action to defend itself. And for people who have never known war, not even their parents have known war, people who for 80 years don't know what war is, it is very difficult to understand when you have war every few years, when every day people are trying to kill you, because you live in a region where Arabs do it to each other. Not all of them, but the radicals, and they're doing it throughout the region. And they couldn't possibly treat the Jews better than they treat their own brothers who speak the same language, have the same religion, and so on. So, in order to deal with the radicals, by the way, for the benefit of the moderates in the Arab world, who understand that Israel is on their side in fighting the radicals, Israel needs to take measures that people in Europe cannot understand, that some Americans find difficult to understand, that others throughout the world don't even want to try to understand. Because a society that is productive, that needs to do something when it gets up in the morning, not to kill its neighbors, but we're here not to win wars. We are here to build a better society, a more robust democracy, a stronger economy, a more sophisticated science, and so on. This is what we get up in the morning for. And when you have constantly terrorist attacks, you can't do it. And when you respond to it, people don't understand the need to respond to it because they don't understand what the real choice is. The real choice is not Israel will not respond and then everybody will love Israel and the Middle East will be peaceful and we can ride our unicorn into the sunset and live happily ever after. It is either you destroy the radicals when they attack you and when they prepare to attack you, or a much greater war will emerge. A much more comprehensive war will engulf the entire region and make it impossible for everybody.
Well, I mean, in some ways, that's what we've seen over the last 2 years. You know, thinking about the last 2 years of war since the Hamas massacre on October 7th, 2023, what do you think is the biggest lesson that Israel has taken away from this massacre, from these last 2 years of war on 7 or 8 fronts?
This is very clear. The Israelis came to the conclusion, finally, that they must preempt, that they cannot wait until the barbarians are ready to make war against Israel. They must prevent them from having the means to make war against Israel, because whatever they do, when they arm, when they build an underground city, when they collect weapons, all of this is until they are ready to make war, and we must prevent them from having it before they are ready. But let me go first back to the question of anti-Semitism. Okay. Although this is not the motivation is that people don't understand that Israel cannot go along with, the international community will bring peace and all this. People find it very difficult to understand Israel. Many people hate Israel, and then they have the arsenal of anti-Semitism ready for them. The blood libel is there, so the New York Times can basically say, Jews kill children, which is the message that you have not only from the New York Times, but the BBC and CNN, and you have it in international organizations and so on. So the arsenal of anti-Semitism is being used, and then the anti-Semites come out, and in addition to the anti-Semites in the deep right, you now have the anti-Semites on the deep left, and part of the Arabs who come to Europe and to other Western countries, and then you have a synergy of all the haters of Israel, and they come against Israel.
And it seems clear that we're not really going to win that war anytime in the near future, that, as you said, anti-Semitism is always just below the surface and will continue to rear its ugly head. But winning does actually need to mean something, at least for the state of Israel. And I'm wondering, today we're in this fragile ceasefire in the north, a fragile ceasefire in the south. And if we take any further steps, what would winning really look like? Is it that we're going to get that last hostage home? Is that we're going to have real deterrence? Can we have real deterrence?
Until we forget the lessons of October 7th, which unfortunately will happen, we will continue to preempt. We will continue to prevent Hezbollah from being able again to accumulate 150,000 projectiles to send against Israel. We will prevent Hamas from being strong enough so that it can prepare a war against Israel.
So
we will try to prevent Iran from having thousands of ballistic missiles produced every month so that they can attack Israel on a massive scale. The problem is we had the lessons before. We had them in 19, 21, 29, 36, 39, 47. We had them in the Second Intifada. And we keep forgetting that we can't have tranquility. If the other side is quiet, it is because it is preparing. But the important thing is to put it in a regional context. And that's the most important achievement of this war. Most Arab states are with Israel. Not only have they acquiesced with the existence of Israel, but also they understand that they need Israel, because the United States may be more powerful, but Israel is more dependable. Israelis will continue to fight the radicals who are the enemies of both the Arab world and Israel.
Okay, so Dr. Shiftanis, what you're saying is that we're going to essentially continue to be at war on these 7 fronts because we're going to need to prevent ceasefire will be in place, but in fact we will have to continue to prevent the attacks against us. But meanwhile, the win would actually be regional stability, normalization with Saudi Arabia, with Indonesia and others?
I don't know if we will have normalization with Saudi Arabia. I want cooperation much more than normalization, because this is what counts. But more than anything else, I want them to work with Israel and to continue the trend that we've started in this war, where even though they say terrible things about Israel, they understand that they desperately need the conviction of Israel, the determination of Israel, and they're willing to do something in return. Look, we've been attacked by hundreds of ballistic missiles from Iran twice, and the Saudis and the Jordanians, under the American umbrella, helped Israel protect it from these missiles, because they understand that the majority of the Middle East and Israel are on one side, and the radicals, by the way, mostly led by non-Arabs, by Iran and possibly in the future Turkey. At the moment, Israel in the Arab world is in a much better situation than ever before, even if Arab leaders don't say it. Look, I came only yesterday back from the UAE, and I've been there 9 times, and I'm meeting there people from throughout the Arab world, and I go to other places in the Arab world, and what they say openly and what they know and are willing to say when I provoke them enough are 2 very different things. They're willing to understand that the real enemy of the United States, of most Arab states, and of Israel are the same enemies. Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood is the enemy of Egypt. It's the enemy of Jordan. And they understand it. They know it.
And yet the West continues to seem to get this narrative wrong and to not be able to understand what you just described regarding regional dynamics. You've argued before that Hamas is really weaponizing the Western values and the Western institutions. So if you had to name the top 2 arenas where this is happening, what would they be? And what can Israel do to help educate the West so they can get on board?
Israel can try, but it doesn't really help very often, because people who want to believe that we are all interdependent and basically we are going towards a future where the international community will determine peace and the United Nations and the courts in The Hague will organize the international system. People who want to believe it cannot be persuaded by a better argument of Israel. They're not interested in the fact that Israel, but 2 things are happening that are very important. Whereas the sympathy for Israel is going down, the respect for Israel is going up. For instance, even if in America, particularly in the Democratic Party, but also with isolationists in the on the Republican side, they like Israel less. On the other hand, if America wants to leave the Middle East, and everybody agrees they should pivot to Asia, who do you leave the Middle East with? You can leave it with the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Israelis, but whatever configuration in the Middle East, Israel is the key factor. It is by far the most important power in the Middle East. Israel also degraded from Iran, from being a first-rate regional power to a third-rate regional power. Everybody understands that only the strengths of Israel can replace, in conjunction with other Arab players. But Israel is the key to a situation where the United States can leave the Middle East. So even if you're an American isolationist, you may not like Israel, but you need Israel. Israel knows that it can ignore Europe. Let me put it this way. Europe can present us with a problem, and a serious problem, and European sanctions will hurt Israel very much, but not with a dilemma. because listening to Europe is not an option. If Israel would have listened to Europe, Saddam Hussein would have had nuclear weapons, Assad would have had nuclear weapons, we would have had the second intifada here in this interview, just around the corner, because you can't listen to people they know that what they say is so irrelevant that they stop even trying to be responsible.
That's unbelievable. Now, thinking about people that are being responsible or giving us feedback. America itself has been giving a lot of feedback and even getting very immersed into Israeli decision-making especially since the U.S. Elected Trump as the president. And you've actually been very sharply critical of American strategic instincts in the region. So what do you think that Israel actually needs from Washington today? And is there also some advice that Washington might be giving that Israel should say, no, and walk away?
Well, first of all, our relations with the United States are very, 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 very important. By the way, not so much in arms supply, although this is also an important component, but preventing with its veto the United Nations from international sanctions that the Europeans would have gone along. Perhaps not Germany, perhaps not everybody in Europe, but Europe will join with so-called non-aligned states against Israel.